Good afternoon, colleagues, staff, and members of the gallery. Welcome to the 12th meeting of the Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing, or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make such request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or by dialing 519-661-2489, extension 2425. Just a reminder, the committee will recess at approximately and as sharp as possible, close to 6:30 p.m. for dinner as required. Failing such will be not a good thing. So, opening the meeting, I'll ask for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Thank you. Seeing Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just with respect to the strategies in the strategic plan, it identified conflicts of interest pertaining to child reach earlier, and those will continue on through our discussions about the strategic plan.
So noted. Thank you. Any other disclosures? Councillor Lehman.
I'll be disclosing conflict, and I'm not too sure of the number on downtown BIA, or BIA funding.
So noted. Thank you. Any other disclosures? Councillor Van Merberg.
Thank you. My wife operates her own daycare, so those sections in the strategic plan that relate to daycare. Thank you.
So noted. Any other disclosures? Thank you very much. We have 3 items on the consent agenda, unless it is the will of members of council to pull any of 2.1, 2.2, or 2.3, the corporate asset management policy, London Community Grants policy update, City of London service review project update. I'm not aware of any request to pull those from the consent agenda. So I will look for a motion to approve the consent agenda. Councillor Morgan, seconded by Councillor Pelosa. Comments or questions? As I turn your attention to the screen, we call the question.
No. Councillor Morgan?
And the mayor votes yes as well.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 15-0.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, I'll turn your attention to item 3, scheduled items 3.1, Council Strategic Plan 2019 to 2023. Draft outcomes, expected results, strategies, metrics, targets, and preliminary cost estimates. Ms. Livingston, could I turn this over to you, please?
Your Worship, thank you. We're back to discuss and finalize the Council Strategic Plan for 2019 to 2023. We would like to propose that this be the approach to this evening's discussion. I'll do a quick reminder of timelines and next steps, and then we would suggest that you move through in terms of looking first to the Back to the River discussion, next to the recommendations from ANOVA and London Abused Women's Centre, and third, deal with any final additional changes that Council may wish to have with respect to the strategic plan. The Council report reflects the changes that were made last day, and also in front of you is the slide deck and the feedback from our online system with respect to the ANOVA and London Abused Women's Centre recommendations, which I'll touch on at that time. So just a reminder, this is the process that we have been working through together, and we are nearing the end of the process in terms of final changes and next steps. In terms of next steps, hopefully we walk out of the room this evening with a final set of directions in terms of the strategic plan, and then council will come back together on April 23rd for a special meeting to approve that plan at SPPC, moving immediately into the council meeting that evening. So with that, Your Worship, I would just remind, the first discussion is back to the river, and this is what is currently in the draft strategic plan.
So noted. Thank you, Ms. Livingston. It's too early to thank you and staff. I'll wait till the end of this for the hard work that you've put together in this report. But colleagues, we've had a request from Back to the River for a presentation. But before that, I believe we have a presentation from staff. Mr. Fleming, I believe that would be you. If I could ask you colleagues to turn your attention to this presentation.
Thank you, Your Worship. What I'm going to do is take you through the history relating to the Back to the River project. I'm going to do it fairly quickly. All started about 5 years ago when Council endorsed an international design competition and participation in the process and approved $50,000 to contribute to that process. During that same time, there were some specific and clear objectives, and they would go under those columns of social, environmental, and economic. Under social, bringing Londoners back to the river in the core area, giving better access to the river, a place for large community gatherings, and public spaces for everyone, all citizens. On the environmental side was to improve health of the river, and Upper Thames River Conservation Authority has been very involved throughout. Grow appreciation, long-term stewardship for the river, and on the economic side, assist in downtown or core area regeneration. It would be a public space that is part of London's quality of life offering, building a city that attracts and retains labor force, talent, etc., and another piece of tourism infrastructure. So those were the core values. Now, as in response to and related to some of the other projects that were going on across North America, not unusual. This one's in Saskatoon, River Landing. Here's another one in Burlington. This is a 6-phase project that's going on. These are just waterfront projects that were also discussed and at the fore at the time. And then Hamilton West Harbor, this is the one that's ongoing right now and has a juried process as well. Another one in Detroit that I just was looking at today. Next step in the process is Council approved the 2015-2019 strategic plan. You're going through that process now for the next 4 years. And it included in many different cases strategies relating to this specific project. So under building a sustainable city, you can see invest in making London's riverfront beautiful and accessible for all Londoners, growing our economy, partnering with the London Community Foundation there under a diverse and resilient economy, and then urban regeneration, invest in London's downtown as the heart of our city. Next step along the journey was our move forward, which is downtown London's plan for the future. And it includes a number of different transformative projects, the Flex Street being one of them. And you can see here, if I can get this mouse to work, here we go. Transformative project number 3 is at the Forks. And within the plan, it speaks to that specific project. 2015 Design Ideas Competition for London's Central Riverfront, hosted by the London Community Foundation, will inform the development opportunities associated with this project. So, making its way through a lot of municipal projects, municipally approved documents. Next step in the process came forward in June, actually twice in June, and as a result, Council approved the process for the design competition, the jury, the steering committee, and $250,000 for the detailed design to go to the successful candidate with a number of checkpoints and when it would come back to Council, including what we're talking about today. In July through to October, the International Design Competition occurred. interest from 300 firms worldwide, 19 submissions that ranged across a number of different continents, and 5 finalists that were selected. In October, there were about 300 residents that came out to the presentation by the 5 proponents. And the jurors selected at the end of the day in November, Civitas and Stantec for their Ribbon of the Thames project. It came back to council in January 2016 with the council, where council endorsed the jury selected winning design by Civitas and Stantec as the long-range plan for waterfront enhancement in the core area. And that was to be something that would be a long-term project. This is the council resolution. And it says the Ribbon of the Thames created by Civitas and Stantec be endorsed as a long-range concept for further enhancement of the Thames Valley corridor between Oxford, Wardenclyffe, and Adelaide streets. So what does the project look like? Well, it does touch on a large stretch of the river, and you can see it portrayed here. This is from their proposal. It touches on many cultural assets that are identified and heritage pieces. It speaks to the, and integrates a number of different walking loops and sort of an integrated approach to how people will access the river. It also speaks to restoring the river, both nature, biodiversity, and a number of other things within our core. And it also established through the plan a number of different ways to access the river, both winter, for all seasons, as well as for people of all abilities. It also spoke to that economic piece, which is how can we spur development along those many different sites that you see here that they identified that have some sort of development potential. This was the capital cost of the program. It amounts to about $40 million in total, not counting that one little piece that talks about the Performing Arts Center. But the inaugural project at the Forks was this piece and the ribbon on top of that. And I just want to point out that the Forks piece is not just the piece that we've been focusing on most recently, but also included some components over here, including a restaurant and a boat launch and the potential for a walking bridge across the river. And you can see in this more detailed blow up of the one side, there's everything from seating walls to walkways, promenade, and it's building on the splash pad that's already there. This is the image most of you would be familiar with, and you can see there's about 5 pillars that or piers that are in the water. But what a lot of people haven't really spent a lot of time on is another inaugural project that's part of the overall strategy was the Soho neighborhood project. And this also was a significant project. There's terracing down to the river, down to the flats, the notion of a splash pad, a bridge across the river, walking bridge. So in March 2016, as this is a long-term plan, a business case was brought forward for the Forks. And at the end of the day, the business case was approved with revisions. $700,000 was approved for the environmental assessment, which led to the EA process that Ashley's going to talk about in a minute. And then $5 million was identified in the Economic Development Reserve Fund for the inaugural project, but conditional upon it coming back after it had been designed for a final decision by council. And this is what it looked like in that multi-year budget. So I'm now going to turn it over to Ashley, who's going to talk about the phase 1 and phase 2 of the Back to River EA.
And I might mention, Ashley, you've got about 3 minutes to, and I know you will. You'll be amazing.
That is about how long what I've got to say goes. So of course, in November 2016, Council endorsed the One River EA terms of reference. This was meant to bring a number of strategic infrastructure projects together to form a cohesive plan for our river environment. So in 2017, we worked through stage 1 of the One River EA, and in January 2018, we reached a pivotal point where Council approved the decommissioning of Springbank Dam. That was staff's recommendation. So with the One River Master Plan then, what you can see here is that the plan encompasses the area historically affected by the operation of Springbank Dam. The plan sets out the framework for improvements along the river corridor in the context of the natural river levels, as well as the back to the river vision. It was decided to complete the Schedule B environmental assessment requirements for the decommissioning of Springbank Dam and the Forks of the Thames project concurrently with the master plan. So the preferred alternatives for each part were presented at a public information center in October of 2018. So that's where we are at that point. So Q1 2018 was when that second stage launched. So then at the Forks, the preferred alternative is what you're seeing on the screen here. So it's a suspended walkway with softscape terraces. It includes that walkway, which provides a scenic view of all three branches of the river. The double suspension support frames views of both the river and the city. The terraces that slope towards the river provide public gathering space. And there's also some naturalization of a portion of the river bank and within Ivy Park, as well as a boat dock. Space has been set aside for acknowledgement and appreciation of First Nations history and culture in the area. This alternative maintained the vision of the original Back to the River design while reducing the impact on the natural environment. And as a side note, the full report will be available shortly as we are in the last stages of finalizing it. We anticipate presenting the report on to Civic Works Committee in May and recommending the notice of completion be filed. So in this rendering, you can see the amphitheater event seating that faces the prow of the ribbon, which can be used as a stage. The site features universal access to all levels, as well as connectivity to the Thames Valley Parkway,
30 seconds, please.
as well as ensuring lots of space for leisure and enhancing nature. So there's a view from the other side, and yet another rendering to take you through quickly. And then, of course, the cost analysis. So, of course, this is a more detailed cost analysis than what was available at the competition stage, and it does include your engineering and contingency. And I'm sure there may be more questions on that, so I'll turn it back to John.
The last 10 seconds, I'll just say there's a lot of stuff going on in the Forks area, and you can see it's development as well as public projects, including the Flex Street, the separation of sewer, down in the Soho area, the towers that are going on there, the promenade, the multi-use bike pathway, some adaptive reuse, residential towers, and work at the museum.
Thanks very much, colleagues. I know that looked a little rushed towards the end there. This is not the, just so you know, this is not the last time that we're going to be looking at this as well. The EA will be coming through, and of course, issues around the budget. So what I'm suggesting to you is that this is not the only time, nor the final time, nor are we making a decision tonight with respect to this. But I would invite, if there are any comments that staff might have or council might have to staff to ask the question. John, Mr. Fleming, we may pull you back up for a few moments. Any brief questions, knowing that this will not be the last time that we deal with this issue? Comments or questions from colleagues? Councillor Lewis.
Did he ask us to come on?
Time's counting. Let's do it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, a couple of questions to Mr. Fleming, and I hope he can provide some information on these. I've asked him these in advance so that he'd had an opportunity to get a couple questions. And if I throw any curveballs your way, I apologize. First is a straightforward question. Where did this Back to the River plan originate? Because there's been conflicting reports that it's originated at City Hall, that it's originated from the London Community Foundation. So where did it originate? And as a follow-up to that, is it possible to do some components of Back to the River and not do everything that was listed in the projects that we saw in the slide presentation?
Mr. Fleming.
Thank you, Your Worship. The London Community Foundation initiated this process. You can see there's been a lot of co-collaboration. Downtown Master Plan was happening at a similar time, but they definitely initiated this project, and it's intended to be delivered a piece at a time as budget is available. So that has always been portrayed as the way that the larger Back to the River project will occur.
Councillor?
Just to follow up to that, hearing, in pieces and as budget allows, one of the items that has come up through the One River EA process, and we heard Ms. Ramalou refer to the Springbank Dam decommissioning. have we set aside budget for the Springbank Dam commissioning? And am I correct that the presentation that was made at Museum London in the public information center projected that removal of the dam, fully removing the dam, would be in the range of $10 million or so?
Mr. Fleming?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I wonder if Ms. Ramlou could answer that one.
Please.
So through the chair, so first of all, the budget for Springbank Dam, so there is money still available from the settlement that the city received, and that is available for council to direct it be used for the decommissioning of Springbank Dam. Secondly, the cost estimate for the full removal, yes. So the one that was shown at the PIC originally was in the range estimated between 10 to 20 million. It was a high-level conceptual estimate. At this point, as we near completion of the EA, we do have a more detailed estimate. We do still expect that it would be in the range of $6 to $12 million.
Final follow?
Just a final follow-up on that. When you alluded to the money that was set aside from the settlement, do we have a dollar figure on what that money set aside was?
Mr. Fleming? Through you?
Sure. Through the chair, I believe we have about $3.5 million available still from that.
Thank you. Appreciating this is just for information request from staff. Any other questions for staff? Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Thank you. I'm looking at this cost analysis in the package and what was given to us on the overheads. So basically on the low end, we're looking at about 11 million. Anywhere in that amount of money, is there anything in there to actually clean the river? Is there anything included in that?
Please.
Through the chair, although water quality is not explicitly dealt with through that particular project, there are aspects for the shoreline remediation. There are failing gaping baskets and so on in that area and failing erosion control. So there is some money set aside for that within that budget.
Councillor.
Yeah, because it would seem to me that before we go through the bother and the obvious expense of doing a project like this, that we'd actually want a river that was clean.
Could I?
And was somewhat appetizing.
I'm going to interrupt, colleagues. This is, as opposed to debate about the project, this is specific questions to staff as it relates to the project, please.
Thank you. I'm finished.
Thank you. Any other, Councillor Squire?
One of the things I'm not clear on is we have a set of drawings that we commissioned, and a person, I saw him several times. He's sort of like an architect, I take it. What about the engineering of this project? You know, you provided estimates of what it's going to cost to do it. Has an engineer actually looked at it and said, you know what, your numbers are in the ballpark, they're accurate, or have they been tested out? Because, I mean, I could go draw a building tomorrow and the thing would probably fall down. I'd want an engineer to look at it and say, this is feasible and here's what it's going to cost you. Have we done that?
Mr. Fleming.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, absolutely. That really is what the EA process is all about, and Ms. Ramlou is an engineer, and she can take you through that in more detail if you like. But in fact, it might be a good idea for her to talk about that structural piece. But that is the intention, at least at a high level, that detailed design from a structural perspective as well.
Ms. Ramlou, did you want to add a comment to that, please?
Sure, absolutely. Yes, at the more detailed level for the environmental assessment, the architect does work with an engineering firm and a structural engineering firm, so they came up with the revised concepts and costed those accordingly. I have about a 6-page detailed cost estimate for it at this point, so it is far more detailed now.
Thank you, Councillor Squire.
So just through to whoever wants to answer, so is it your professional opinion or somebody's professional opinion that these are accurate numbers to build this project, A, and B, that it can be built within the environmental limitations and the of the particular area, because that's important to me.
Mr. Fleming. Ms. Ramlou.
Absolutely. Of course, we are still at the environmental assessment stage, so these things are finalized through the detailed design phase, which is when you go to an even greater level of surety on the estimates, but we have included some fairly hefty contingencies in here as well, and it is more detailed at this point. So I believe we are getting towards a reasonable ballpark. Through the design also, you can always do value engineering and so on to keep it within budget.
Thank you. Councillor Lehman.
Through you, Mr. Chair, do we have an estimate of the annual cost for upkeep and maintenance of these structures?
Ms. Remillard.
That I do not have at this time. In terms of the park setting, it is still an existing park and pathways and so on, so you will still have the same operations type. But I would leave it to a colleague to speak if he believes that there will be anything else significant.
Any further comments? Mr. Fleming.
Your worship, through the multi-year budget, when we bring a big capital project like this forward, we'd also be taking a look at the operating. I can't recall. I don't think we've identified anything yet in the strat plan, but we would do that in the multi-year budget where you'll see that detail.
So that financial information will be there then. Any other comments or questions for staff? Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you. So this is the plan from the winning applicants, but we also own all the other ideas from the other contestants as well. And those are available to us if we were to choose. Is that not correct?
Mr. Fleming?
Your worship, I'd need to consult with Mr. Card to understand the details of that. And also go back to understand exactly what the provisions were of the design competition. As I recall, the final submissions, there was some opportunity for using some of those concepts, but I think there are some limitations that go with that. So I would prefer to come back if that's a question that council wants certainty on.
Sounds like there will be an opportunity in the future. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Your Worship. So in the presentation, I heard Mr. Fleming say that the inaugural project included something at the Forks and as well as something at Soho contemplated. Is that correct?
Mr. Fleming?
Your Worship, there were two inaugural projects that were identified by Stantec, one at the Forks and the other one at Soho. The one that we're bringing forward for, or that we brought forward previously was for the Forks. That's where council set aside the $5 million and the amount for the EA. And then this time coming forward, both of the inaugural projects are included in the strat plan that you have before you.
Councillor.
Yes, and so I'm clear. Both of the inaugural projects are included in the strat plan. The cost estimates in the EA for Back to the River only covers one portion of it, or does the EA cover both portions? Because you just mentioned that that's where you were going to drive some of the more detailed cost estimates from. So I just want to understand, do we have the more accurate cost estimates for just the Forks piece, or are we going to have any more cost estimates for the Soho piece?
Thank you, Your Worship. In your strategic plan, the item that we're referring to right now and the EA that we're referring to right now is for the Forks inaugural project. And certainly in the multi-year budget, we'll bring forward some estimates relating to cost and upkeep, activation, and those sorts of things like we did for the Flex Street. Similarly, what we've identified in the strategic plan, and this is with Mr. Mathers, who put it in initially, in that same strategy, I think it's called BSC 20, there are two items. One is for an EA in the Soho area to do the Soho inaugural project, of which London Community Foundation has indicated that they would contribute a significant amount to that project, or to the EA itself. And there's also the project in Soho, the inaugural project that's identified in your strategy. And once again, London Community Foundation can speak for themselves, but they've identified that they may wish to embark upon a capital campaign relating to that project.
Thank you. While we have staff here, any other questions? There will be another opportunity. I promise colleagues. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, through the chair to staff, I understand when we started the One River project that we had the Springbank Dam linked to the Forks of the Thames. And council did make a decision to decommission the Springbank Dam. So I just have two quick questions. I'd like to just get an update on where we are with the decommissioning of the Springbank Dam. And in relation to the Forks project, is there any decision that we do or make with the Forks? Has that got anything to do with what will happen to the dam?
Mr. Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Ms. Ramalou and possibly her colleagues could speak to that one better than mine. I could.
Ms. Ramalou.
Absolutely. So for the decommissioning of the dam, we do require an environmental assessment, so that's being completed under the One River work, so that will be complete very shortly. At this point, the dam and the Forks can really be considered separately. Now that we have a decision for the dam, that's where its influence for the Forks pretty well ends. They are separate environmental assessments underneath the master plan at this point.
Ms. Hopkins? Good. I understand that the EA report will come back through Civic Works at the appropriate time. Any other comments or questions for staff? Well, thank you very much. One more. Councillor Van Riebeek.
With regard to the suspension outlook at the Forks, how much money is that in terms of this package we're seeing in front of us? How much is that one element?
Ms. Ramalou?
So through the chair, the ribbon overlook total is that 7.3 to 8.2 million. Of that, that includes your consulting fees, your engineering, and your contingency.
Any other questions for staff? Councillor Van Riebeek.
Just to be clear, I'm just talking about the outlook at like the actual, some call it the bridge to nowhere. That's what I'm referring to. How much does that cost?
Ms. Ramalou.
So that is the piece, and then the site works for the terracing and the park works and so on around it are the additional $4 million.
So 4 million for that one element.
Always through the chair, please, Mr. Van Riebeek. Ms. Ramalou.
So through the chair, so yeah, so it's that total for the 11 to 12 million, so of which the ribbon overlook is approximately 7 to 8 million.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you. You have a question, Mr. Fleming.
I just wanted to point out, Mr. Chair, that London Community Foundation, again, they can speak for themselves, but they had committed to contributing $2 million towards the ribbon outlook previously, and they did that at a session of council during budget.
So noted. Thanks very much. I'd like to thank staff for that presentation. That was helpful. Colleagues, we have a request for delegate status from the London Community Foundation regarding Back to the River. And separate from that, we have, well, let's deal with this first, please. And they have requested 10 minutes. Typically, it is 5. It's the pleasure of colleagues. We can confirm 5 as our normal time frame here, but they requested in advance. So if we were to do that, we would require a motion to allow that to happen. Councillor Van Holst?
I'm happy to move a motion for.
Is there a seconder?
Delegation.
Councillor Hopkins, thank you. Comments, questions? Being mindful of precedent, I'll turn your attention to the screen as we call the question.
Councillor Van Riebeek. Closing the vote, the motion carries 15 to 0.
I'll invite Ms. Powell, the London Community Foundation representatives, Ms. Powell, Mr. Playford, Mr. Playford, who's all coming up from your side? And are you having a formal presentation that we can peek at on our screens, please?
Yes, Your Worship. Thank you very much. I have with us Fred Galloway. He's the chair of the Back to the River Committee, and Martha Powell, our CEO. So I want to thank you, Your Worship, and the committee members for this opportunity to speak about the London Community Foundation's involvement with Back to the River. My name's Greg Playford. I'm the chair of our board of directors. We also have lots of our supporters, donors, and staff who've made it out here today.
You're eating up their time as you applaud, but it's nice of you to do that.
And before starting, I just want to acknowledge the tremendous support and commitment we've had from your staff through this journey. And that includes planning, engineering, the parks people, finance. They've been tremendous, and they've been a big help, and as you see from the presentation, they've done an awful lot of work. I also want to acknowledge the support we've had from our third member of our group, the Upper Thames Valley Conservation Authority. They've been involved from day one and have provided us with lots of important information and lots of things to consider. So it's an exciting and a productive partnership, and Fred's going to speak to it a little bit later. So the London Community Foundation is one of 190 community foundations in Canada. I think we're the 10th or 11th largest. We've got over 1,400 donors. We administer over 300 funds. And we help our donors direct their philanthropic interests into needed initiatives in London and Middlesex. Just going to the next slide. Oh, here we go. Yeah. So quoting from our strategic plan, we are a catalyst creating systemic change by funding initiatives that will tackle our community's most pressing issues. And just by way of example, so in the last few years, we've been granting $3.5 to $4.5 million a year. In the last 5 years, we've granted over $20 million. Some of the areas we've devoted our grants into, mental health, homelessness. In the area of homelessness, just so you know, we've supported the 3 Housing First initiatives in the city, YOU, the Unity Project, and Mission Services, all of them getting over $250,000. So we're funding the staffing for those projects. In the area of addictions, last year we funded the initiative by the Salvation Army to turn their Center of Hope into a addiction recovery center. In the area of community health, another one of our recipients of our community vitality grants last year was the Glencairn Community Dental Clinic. So we also have something called the Social Impact Fund, and this is new, created as a challenge from the Governor General a few years back. And we've allocated 10%, roughly 10% of our assets to our Social Impact Fund. We've been providing low interest loans that help affordable housing developers acquire land. We help them at the front end, so they're using our money to buy sites and to cover the gap, the bridge between when the project starts and when the government grants and the mortgages flow. So very, very important. We have a huge demand. We've helped build 130 units of affordable housing. We've just approved 2 new projects, so there'll be another 130 units started with help from the Social Impact Fund. We also supported 5 social enterprises, such things as the ATN grocery store in Old East Village. So along with these more traditional things, a few years back, we broadened our interest to get involved in community mobilization. These are a few of the things we've done: the support for the Syrian refugee program. We oversaw the disbursement of the federal funding and kind of coordinated the local activity. Mental health and addictions, we had a number of community forums. We've put seed money into both research and other initiatives. And we'll be soon announcing an affordable housing initiative. And then Back to the River is our current one. So our involvement in Back to the River, it's based on concerns identified in the community and expressed by our donors It's an area that we feel we can provide leadership in, and it's an initiative that will have a positive impact on the environment, the economy, and the social impacts. I'm going to turn it over to Fred.
May I mention there are 5 minutes left, please?
Our timing's right on. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council, for the opportunity to share some insights and perspectives on the Back to the River. We hope to clarify a lot of the things that we've heard around the community and in other circles. We started this 4 years ago. It came out of various consultations and activities in the community. And we were encouraged that maybe the Thames River could become much more higher, more exposed, a higher level resource in the community, as it is one of the 10 heritage rivers in Canada. And we partnered with the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority in the City of London. And what sometimes is lost is this is a 20-plus year vision. This is an idea about all the river inside the whole city. And you have to start somewhere. So the first generation was the Oxford Street Bridge to the Adelaide Street Bridge to the Warncliffe Street Bridge. And that was the first generation. But we see this moving forward. We talked to a lot of other river organizations around North America. And we found out that this is a long-term perspective and it will touch the whole community. We did 4 focus groups before we got started with Indigenous peoples, landowners along the river, environmental groups, corporate groups. And we hosted a community workshop at Western Fair. John said 300, but I guess we counted a little different. We had 500 in our count who came out to hear about the proposal, and we're very, very supportive. Our vision was clearly to build the local economy, developing a prosperous, bustling riverfront, which many communities, and I do a lot of work around the province with municipalities. What we saw in Burlington, Hamilton, Cambridge, what Kitchener's going to launch along the Grand River, what Windsor's done along its waterfront. These are many communities now that are making significant investments because they see that not just the recreational and the engagement value, but also the economic value of the land development that occurs around these areas. The health of the river, which was a major consideration in our goals, and the Upper Thames has provided a lot of leadership in terms of that dimension. The social cultural fabric with the dynamic, inclusive gathering places for all Londoners, to connect back to the river through affordable housing, and to create a space for everybody. So some of the numbers that maybe have been bounced around that people need to maybe understand that this started with a pool of $550,000. The day it was announced, we had a donor phone us up and provide us $100,000. We as a foundation put in $400,000 and the City of London granted us $50,000, and we started with that pool for both the process of running it, both the jury costs, as well as the winning prize to the successful proponent. There's been 4 years and thousands of hours of work from the London Community Foundation, Upper Thames, the City of London, and many corporate volunteers have worked on this. Without even getting into a formal capital campaign, we were able to secure a year into this after the announcement of the winning proposal, 2 $1 million donations for the ribbon. One of the $1 million is in our account now, and we have a donor agreement. The other, we have a donor agreement, but they are waiting to see if this project moves forward. We have a $1 million donation for the inaugural development project in Soho. And we've had a $3 million donation recently for affordable housing in Soho connected to the Back to the River project. We've had a development grant from McConnell, and the TD Friends of the Environment have provided funding along the way. These are some of the community supports that have been involved with us, many of them from the start, and so we've had a fair amount of corporate and community support. We think it's a tremendous opportunity attracting donors and developers to invest. And I've seen some press articles where some developers have indicated Back to the River has been part of the calculus in some of their investments in residential towers. Growing our economy, civic engagement, improving access to a heritage river, and opportunities to provide a whole range of significant volunteer contributions. So we urge your support for the community initiative to bring London back to its river. And thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts, perspectives, and facts with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for regarding the time, colleagues. Please stop. Council doesn't need that kind of praise, but we appreciate it nonetheless. Any questions for our presenters? Councillor Squire.
I guess just understanding what we're doing tonight, which is not passing judgment on Back to the River. We're talking about our strategic plan. Is there some priority to having the Forks of the Thames project done before the Soho project? And I'll ask you why. As you know, we are under tremendous, not pressure, but people want to see affordable housing. And I see that the Soho element has affordable housing. It also has $4 million contributed to it. So is there some problem with us saying, look, in terms of prioritization, right now for the City of London, Soho is the most important part of your project? Why would that be a problem for you if it is?
Mr. Galloway.
I think it would be a challenge from a couple of perspectives. First of all, we already have the $2 million for the Forks project with us. Second, before any of the inaugural project can proceed in Soho, it requires an environmental assessment, which is going to take 1 to 1.5 years. And we know through discussions with the two Forks donors, they've already waited 3 years, so waiting 4 more years or 3 more years is not really an option for them. So that could be a lost opportunity. And if everything's deferred until after the EA, we could be 4 or 5 years out before we could launch the Soho initiative. If the EA is approved in your strategic plan to move forward, we would be in a position to launch the affordable housing initiative in Soho.
Mr. Squire? No, I understand. Thank you. Mr. Lehman, Councillor Lehman.
It's been the habit of this council to occasionally thank folks for doing wonderful work, and I'll take it upon myself today. Thank you to the London Community Foundation for doing terrific work in London, for your donations, and for the people that work in the organization. Again, following up to Councillor Squire's remark, for the ribbon, that's a significant amount of money. I just want you to tell me why that is such an important part of this project.
Mr. Galloway?
So the ribbon has evolved, maybe certainly to a higher cost than originally conceived, but it was the iconic piece to the inaugural project, right? And all the imagery that you've seen, it is that piece that's going to be promoted, that's going to be the imagery, it's going to be the brand for all the redevelopment that the city's been planning for a while down at the Forks, and we want to leverage and build on. So it becomes important from that perspective. It was identified by the proponent that this was something that they thought would be important, and it's a multi-use. It's not a bridge, it's not just a pathway. It's an area where performance can happen and looks back into the amphitheater. It's a place where buskers and demonstrate exhibits and other types of things can be had, special events can be held on it. So we think it's a pretty integral and a kind of a signature part of the initiative, and it's been part of, I think, what has generated a considerable amount of the donation. Right off the hop, 2 $1 million donations came in year one specific to that particular initiative.
Other questions or comments? Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much. I've been very interested in the idea of having a performance venue near the Forks, an outdoor one. But as I look at the amphitheater, I wonder what is contemplated for this, because it'd certainly be difficult to put on a play there without something behind it. So what kind of uses do you imagine for that amphitheater?
Mr. Galloway?
So I think the kind of the concepts that have evolved around it, and depending on how it's finally designed and developed, it would be a place where nonprofit groups or small assemblies of students or others could put on performances looking into the amphitheater and providing. It's not going to be a sophisticated, high performance, top tier concert venue or dramatic productions venue, but it's really a grassroots type facility where people can have some opportunities to do some interesting things. It connects with Dundas Place that makes a continuation down to the river and along the river. We've had some discussions that maybe the city would animate that area along with animation that they're proposing for the Dundas Place, and to create a much more critical and larger capacity of interesting things to go through, do, and engage with. And without that particular element, we lose that whole kind of assembly concept that was so important to the overall initiative.
Councillor, any other question? Thank you. Any other questions for our presenter? Let me thank the Back to the River folks for their presentation. Much appreciated. Colleagues, I'd like to turn your attention to 3K, which is a request for delegate status, and I'm trying to bunch these together to have some consistency here. We've received a request for delegation status from Robert Humer, President of the Thames River Anglers Association. Related, not connected, but you'll appreciate that. Is there a mover? Councillor Lewis, is there a seconder? Councillor Pelosa, any comments or questions as I turn your attention to the screen and vote, please?
Councillor Hopkins. Closing the vote, the motion carries 15-0.
Thank you. Having said that, I hope Mr. Huber is here. Would you please come to the microphone, and 5 minutes is yours. We'll start as you start. Thank you.
Hello? That's better. Hi there. Thank you for accepting my request for delegation. Honorable Mayor, members of council, staff. Very briefly, there was an updated estimate in terms of the cost projections for looking at decommissioning a Springbank Dam. And as easy as it would be to defer this delegation back to the next Civic Works Committee meeting, when Springbank Dam is back on the table there, I think there's an opportunity for staff to request that, or the council requests that staff go back and take a look at the decision framework that was used to come up with the preferred option for partial decommissioning of Springbank Dam, and really look at how close and narrow that margin came down to as to why we're going with that option, potentially, rather than full decommissioning. If the cost estimates are half of what we were looking at in the original plan, it makes you wonder whether or not that's really the best option in terms of the city, both in the upfront costs, as well as the next decade to 2 decades of maintenance costs associated with keeping any sort of structure in the river whatsoever. So if we're trying to be efficient with time and we're trying to move this along in a manner to keep donors and people who are interested in seeing other projects move along quickly with respect to the Thames River, we shouldn't sit and wait to ask for those more details. So you have some really great outlined line-by-line analysis of what the ribbon of the Thames, what these other projects would look like, and I encourage you to request the same information from staff as it respects to the Springbank Dam. We've been asking for this since the summer and those public information center meetings over and over and over again, have not gotten those details, and it's a little bit frustrating to think that we're at this point. And if you look back 15 years ago, we were rebuilding that dam in the river, so it should not be that difficult to figure out how much that actually costs. And it's a matter if you're setting budget and setting priorities and trying to determine how much we can allocate towards other projects to know really what it's actually going to cost to do any sort of work on the dam itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do colleagues have any questions for Mr. Huber? Thank you for your presentation. We appreciate that very much. Colleagues, we have had a request for delegation status from Danny Bartlett. Let me just be very clear. It's actually Snapshot and recommendations from ANOVA and London Abused Women's Centre, Danny Bartlett, from the Labour Programs and Service Coordinator for United Way, Elgin Middlesex. And we will do that if we have a mover and seconder and appropriate approvals. Councillor Pelosi, seconded by, is there? Councillor Helmer, any comments or questions? Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I just want to clarify our order of proceeding here. We've had a delegation on BSC 20. We haven't discussed that as a committee yet. And I'm not sure whether staff was looking for us to deal with that before we hear the delegations on the other part of the strategic plan. I'm comfortable proceeding either way, and I'm respectful of the fact that our delegates are here waiting to present, but I was looking for some clarification from staff on how they expected to proceed with this.
Staff or the chairs? Clerk, do you have any thoughts on that? Staff? Ms. Livingston, do you have a thought that you'd
Your
like to
Worship,
share?
I'm in your hands. You can deal with Back to the River now, or you can shift it to the discussion after the recommendations from ANOVA and London Abuse Women's Centre.
I'm going to proceed that way, if we may. So with that, there's a motion on the floor. I'll turn your attention to the screen as we vote.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 15-0.
Then I'll ask those folks from the delegation to please come forward and make your presentation, if you would, please. Acknowledging we have 5 minutes, but we won't start till you're ready.
So we actually had, others of us had put in a request for delegation status, but we've decided to just come together, and we understood we would have 8 minutes in total, but we'll probably be faster than that.
It would be 5 because that's what we're advised of. So respectfully, it'll be 5, please.
So I'll be very quick. I'd like to introduce you to Danny Bartlett, Shelley Yeo, and Jesse Rogers, and the recommendation before you has come on behalf of both the ANOVA and the London Abuse Women's Centre, as well as the London Coordinating Committee to End Women Abuse. We would like to thank Council, Lynn Livingston and Cheryl Smith for allowing us extra time so that we could consult with our user groups. And the recommendation before you that women with lived experience are suggesting you consider is that creating a safe London for women and girls be a standalone strategic area of focus. So we want you to know that at the outset, ANOVA and the London Abused Women's Centre have both received service demands since 2017 that have doubled, so in excess of 100% capacity and needs for service. And we also want you to know, because it's important to us that you understand that we are operating our businesses and delivering service based on an intersectional approach. So we understand that there are various different forms of discrimination. For example, race, gender, class, ability, language, and sexual orientation. And what we believe is that we have to amplify all of these voices with gender-based discrimination and use that lens as we develop our programs. So first of all, let you know that in 2018, 148 women in Canada were murdered, primarily by men in this country, every 2.5 days. 1 woman or girl is killed. That has been the trend for the last 4 decades. Indigenous women and girls are overrepresented as victims, and so are girls and women aged 25 to 34, those who are vulnerable and those who we want to continue to keep in our cities. The most common form of killing was shooting, followed by stabbing and beating. And where the accused has been identified, 91% of those accused have been men. So these numbers provide the knowledge that most women and girls experience violence, perpetrated primarily by men because they are women and girls. And we know also that through the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, the City of London dropped from 6th place overall to 12th place amongst its research showing the best and worst places to be a woman living in Canada. We know that if we enhance the safety of women and girls, we make our city one where everyone is counted and the safety of all is enhanced. So London can be a groundbreaker once again, because there is no city in Canada that we have been able to find to date that does make ending male violence against women an area of focus in its strategic plan. We know that when we create safer communities for women and we stand up about that, we increase economic development opportunities because this will become a place that women want to be. And Shelley's just going to talk for a minute about the coordinating committee.
Good afternoon. So I am Shelley Yeo, and I work at ANOVA. I'm also the co-chair of the London Coordinating Committee to End Women Abuse. And last year, we endeavored to put together a snapshot of the services in London, mental health services, children's services, VAW, violence against women services, and so on, along with poverty and safety and those kinds of things. Because we were astonished one more time to hear that at July of last year, 42 or 41 women and 2 children had been murdered in Ontario. At the end of the year, it was closer to 46. That is astonishing. It cannot happen in our province or in our city again. And so it was just fortunate that it didn't occur in London. And I always have to knock on wood when I say that because I think we were lucky in that respect, but lots of other folks weren't in this province, and we want to make London, again, a forerunner in terms of making women's safety and children's safety a priority by naming it, by making sure that it's a place to live and to go to school and to be. So we've provided these snapshots for you. It's not all inclusive. It was our first one, and we intend to do this on an annual basis. We did invite folks to attend. Elizabeth attended our meeting in January, and thanks so much. And a few others to announce this. And just to inform our community one more time that violence against women and girls and children is a priority, that it is continuing to happen. As Megan said, it's not changed in the last 4 decades, and we need it to change, and we want it to change in our own community. And we think that by making it specifically a priority in our strategic plan that we will make it it will probably improve. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I would thank our delegation. I would invite colleagues if you have any questions for the delegation. Councillor Sully.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation, delegates, and thank you guys for coming here today. I did have one question. I know, of course, I'm supportive of doing this, but what else could, I guess, the grassroots members like yourself propose to this council to hold us accountable and, to make sure that we're doing everything we can to stand with women?
Ms. Young.
Thanks so much. I think that one thing we can do is probably have a gendered lens, like policies around gendered lens, so that everything is checked against a gendered lens. Every design initiative, for example, this one that you've been talking about tonight, but every design plan that you have in your community to ensure that it's checked against a gendered lens to make sure that, is it safe for women, and to engage women's groups and so on, individuals around that.
And just to add to that, I would like to say that I think the recommendations that women with lived experience have come up with and the strategic direction are the items that we would like you to take under consideration to implement. And I think this isn't a one solution problem. We have multiple solutions that we've presented before you, which we think will make a difference in the lives of women and girls in this community.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much. Of course, our strategic plan comes with metrics to measure it. And so I'm wondering what kind of metrics those might be, thinking that some possibilities might be the number of arrests related to human trafficking, the number of people that attend training about that problem. But I'd be looking through our chair to our guests to maybe tell us if there might be some other things that you would see measurable in London that would tell us how things are going.
Big question, tight answers. Ms. Walker, please.
Thank you. What we generally recommend is what is in this document, which is that it's a three-pillared response, so that we'd like to see criminal action or legislation, major public awareness, and fully supported services. And London City Council has a role to play in all of those things. And measurable outcomes, we all collect data from the number of women we serve. The London Police Service collects data with respect to sex trafficking and also with respect to sexual violence and male violence against women in their intimate relationships. And I think it's time that all that data come forward on an annualized basis before City Council, starting now, so that you have a benchmark, and moving forward so that you can see the results of the efforts you've taken.
Thank you. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, first I want to thank the women that are here for the amazing amount of work that they've put into this in a very short time, because I know that this came together very quickly. I have a question through you, because I certainly had a concern, Mr. Chair, about whether or not it was appropriate to put this in a separate pillar. And I had a great conversation with Ms. Walker about why that was important, and I would hope that she might enlighten my colleagues as to why she feels it's important for this to be in its own pillar, and perhaps she might comment on how long this effort has been to bring before City Council historically.
Ms. Walker.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, we would like to outline that we've been trying to have women's issues and male violence against women at the forefront since 1994. We have made some progress, only to have new staff members or new elected officials come in and take a step backwards. And if we do not make this a separate, standalone strategic area of focus, once again, women's issues and male violence against women will be buried amongst everything else. This is a very serious issue. It is one that is impacting 1 in 4 women in our community, and their voices deserve to be heard, and there needs to be action taken to ensure that all women and all girls and all children in our communities are protected. And as I say, London has historically been the leader in this issue. Many of the London Coordinating Committee to End Women Abuse partner agencies have international recognition for the work that they're doing. And London could put itself on that international map by doing this as a first in this country, and potentially you will save lives.
Thank you. Councillor Squire.
The results you're looking for are a decrease in what is essentially criminal activity. Criminal activity we all abhor, which is violence against any people, and I just want to make sure we all understand that, and I think we all agree with that particular concept. What I'm interested in is you've outlined a lot of strategies, and without being difficult or anything like that, a lot of them will have huge budget numbers attached to them. For instance, providing free busing to women of low income. So it's really important to me that I understand where your strategies are coming from. In other words, is there some kind of research that I can look at so that I know that this particular strategy is going to have a result? Because we've talked about what we want, which is a huge task, huge, because you've already recognized it hasn't gone down for 4 decades. And then you've identified a lot of strategies, which we will have to budget for. So how do we know the strategies are going to give us the result that you're asking for?
From the delegation.
First of all, I would say that most of our women that are doing our agencies know if you refuse to pay when you get on the bus, you don't have to pay. So that's not going to really change what's happening. But a lot of the strategies we're talking about don't actually talk about more money. It's talking about, before a policy is made, having women in consideration. Like when we think about the safe injection site, it's not safe there for women, and we know that. So if there was conversations before policies are made, without spending more money, we could make it safer for women and girls.
Thank you. Other comments or questions for our delegation? Councillor Pelosi.
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess following up on part of what we went through this morning in a training workshop. Just want to thank you for bearing witness to the horrible atrocities that are happening in our community, recognizing the difference of current and historical abuse from someone who's buried a childhood friend who was murdered by her intimate partner, from someone's cousin who had to sleep in fear because her partner would keep a knife on the nightstand and say, tonight might be the night, I just have to use it. To someone who's also suffered abuse themselves from a prior partner, I do think it is important that we separate these issues out. They're not buried in darkness in a policy. For yearly as this comes forward, it's seen as a metric, and we know those numbers might get worse as women come forward, but that's because it's safe for them to come forward. They know that we're listening, they know that we care, we know that they're hurt, and we know that there's partners for them to come forward to that with. So I thank everyone here for receiving this delegation tonight, for those of us who've made the time in our schedules to go and tour the sites of our service partners, which sadly are very full of people looking for a new start, and that we remember that gender lens. And as you hear our words, that you remember what that gender lens means as we go through our strat planning and what we're actually trying to change and address. And there are certainly other things that this will be integrated into in our conversations as we go forward. So thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, Councilor Bowles. I didn't hear a question there, but I appreciate your comments. Any other comments or questions from council colleagues? Seeing none, may I thank our delegation for your thoughtful comments and council for your comments as well. Ms. Livingston, maybe turn it back over to you. There seemed to be a surge of wishing to do that, and I can understand why. So could we turn it back to you, please, for wisdom?
Your Worship, that takes us to a discussion of any changes to the proposed strategic plan. The order that I had was to go back to a discussion on Back to the River. This is what is in front of you, is what is currently in the strategic plan. If you wish to have any of that, the next step would be to discuss the recommendations from ANOVA and LOC. You had directed us back at the end of March to consult on those recommendations publicly. We have done that. I've provided you at your seats the information. I also have it in the presentation here as well, if you wish me to quickly go over it. And then we would move to any other changes. But again, I'm happy to work in any order. If you wish to discuss the LOC recommendations right now, that's fine too.
Why don't we do it that way? I know there are, bear with me, Councillor Sally, I know there are some recommendations and amendments that are coming forward as well. Councillor Sally, did you wish to make a comment?
I was just going to make a proposal for an amendment, but I'll wait for you, Mr. Mayor.
If it's other than these, why don't we, may I suggest that we wait, because I know there are several that are going to go forward. So Ms. Livingston, in terms of advice then, from a suggestion of what we deal with first.
Your Worship, I would propose that we deal with Back to the River. It's currently in the plan, and then I would suggest you move to the recommendations from ANOVA and LOC, and then any final changes.
So noted. I'll turn colleagues' attention to Back to the River, which should be directly in front of all of you now. There is a recommendation forward, which we would look for a mover and seconder unless there is a move to amend this. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair, and there is indeed a move to amend this, and I have a seconder for this in Councillor Squire, so I'll just All right, close the window. Just read you the amendment. I've provided this language to the clerk already. That the strategic plan section, building a sustainable city, outcome to BSC 20, be amended to read, bring Londoners back to the river by revitalizing the Thames River and deleting radiating from the forks of the river and deleting metric number 1% of the inaugural project at the forks completed. Your worship, if it's appropriate for me to just go ahead and provide you the rationale behind that now, if you want to.
Well, we've got mover and Councillor Squire, you're seconded. Why don't we see if that's put on the floor, unless it's the pleasure of colleagues to hear the rationale first. Why don't you go ahead then, and then we'll determine whether we wish to proceed.
Thank you, Your Worship. Understandably, there are a number of sections in the strategic plan that emphasize the importance of the Thames River to our local environment. BSC 18, BSC 19 on the water quality, BSC 21 implementing their recommendations of the river management plan, and the additional metrics in BSC 20, the completion of the Soho River Corridor EA and implementing the inaugural revitalization project for the Soho neighborhood are all things that I personally feel we should be striving for. But to make our first priority for the Thames to be the construction of what has become, as Councillor Van Meerbergen alluded to in the public term, the bridge to nowhere at a cost of $5 million in public funds, to me is not a priority for us to pursue in this 4-year plan. It's not as though we haven't invested in the downtown core already. We have extensively over the last 20 years. Budweiser Gardens, $52.8 million. Covent Garden Market, $16.9 million. Museum London, $3.3 million. The Central Library, $25.6 million. Fanshawe College, and this is not the Kingsmill project, $20 million. And then another $9 million for the Kingsmill project. And the My Dundas Place Flex Street, which we still haven't completed, $18 million. Over the last 18 years, $201 million have been invested in our downtown core. And by the way, in that total is $6 million for improvements at the forks of the Thames by a previous council. It's not as though this council hasn't invested in arts and cultural draws already either. We've committed $2 million to the $14 million at the Children's Museum. We've committed $2 million to the $8 million for the revitalization of the Grand Theatre. And these are good investments. On the river, we have Springbank Dam. And as we heard tonight, at best, we have only half the funding needed to remove the structure from the river. The inaugural project at the Forks is asking for $5 million in public funding for what is currently a $12 million project. And I appreciate that the London Community Foundation has $2 million in hand. But we have a $5 million unfunded component already. And while it's laudable that donors have offered $2 million, we simply can't allow private donation dollars to dictate where the best value for public dollars being spent is. Unlike the Children's Museum and the Grand Theatre, which came with letters of support from Tourism London's board for those projects, there is not a similar letter of support for this project because the tourism board does not perceive a value to tourism in this project. And so, colleagues, what I really want you to think about is this offering a good return on investment for us? We've already seen $6 million spent by a past council at the Forks that's returned, at best, limited benefits. And we don't have unlimited resources at the end of the day. We were well aware of that in the debate that we just had around rapid transit. There is a limit to the money we have. So I ask you to ask yourself, is this really a priority for constituents in your ward, considering all the other projects and demands that we have on us? And is this really the best use of dollars for the city as a whole right now? I respectfully submit that it's not. I hope you'll agree with me. I hope we will leave the other priorities around back to the river, the Soho piece and completing the EA there in this strategic plan, because I think those are steps that move forward and they invest in our river as well as in needs we have like affordable housing in a way that this simply does not.
Thank you. We have a mover and a seconder. I'll entertain other questions from colleagues with respect to this issue. Pardon me, Councillor Squire? Yes. You have a question or a comment, Councillor Squire? Please.
The reason I supported this motion was that, first of all, I think it's really important because a lot of people have come up to me and said this was a vote on back to the river, which it isn't. I think as the mayor properly identified, this is these projects are going to come to us for a vote as we see the engineering and the costs of them, and we do our multi-year budget. And I think it's really important that although we've allocated $5 million towards it, the final decision on all of this has not yet been made by council. And I'm concerned that we're limiting ourselves to doing the Forks project before we look at other aspects of it that I think we could afford and that are providing affordable housing to us. And I listened very carefully to the answer to my question on why do we have to do the Forks first, and the answer was that they have $2 million for the Forks available. Well, they also have $4 million available for Soho, and what happens if we leave the Soho project and that money goes away when we go to do it? We'll have easily and equally have lost that amount of money. We have a big project to do with the dam. If you add these two projects together now, the decommissioning of the dam and the Forks project, we're looking at over $20 million being allocated to a single project in a single area. And I love the work the Community Foundation is doing, but we've got a lot of demands for money. And all I'm asking, and all this motion is asking for, is let's take away this idea that we absolutely have to do the Ribbon and the Thames and that project first. I frankly would prefer to have a broader vision and say, what are the most important aspects right now of Back to the River for us to do? Is it the Ribbon of the Thames? Or is it something else that has a public housing, affordable housing element to it, which I hear about every day from constituents? So I think, you know, it's a matter of priority and needs. And I think all this is doing is saying, look, let's give us some flexibility so we can look at doing the other part of the project. The other thing to keep in mind is we've already gone 4 years without doing the project. It's not like this is a project that's going to happen in a year or a year and a half with the various priorities we have. So I'm comfortable with doing this. If this had been a motion to kill Back to the River, I wouldn't have supported it. I still want to know more about Back to the River. I want to know what the final cost is. This is just sort of re-looking at the priorities around this particular project.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I think we really have to recognize how integrated these plans are. I mean, this isn't just a piece that exists in isolation, and I recognize it's easy to make statements and say this bridge is a big problem for us. But it's about redeveloping the Forks. And we've, Councillor Lewis has talked about the amount of investment that the city has put into the core. But I think if you're going to say that, it's important that we talk about how much that leveraged. In fact, for every dollar that the city's put into development downtown, there's been a $17 return on that investment. There's a 17-to-1 return on investment from every dollar that the city's put in to help make the core vibrant, to keep it alive. That just came out in the State of the Downtown report. And that was just reported at the Planning Committee on last month. So this is really important to keep that in mind, that the Forks development extends from the Dundas Place development. It has to have a terminal end. Where is it leading people to? How does it connect into the city? How does it connect into the other strategic projects that are associated with our move forward, our downtown master plan? They all link in together. We've heard a couple developers already say that their developments were fairly anchored and rooted in the city's plans to help redevelop the Forks. Heard some discussion about Tourism London. As you saw the priorities in this, the main reasons for redeveloping the Forks is not for a tourist feature. It's to make it a livable space, to help attract businesses and people to live and work downtown. so that we've got some place to have our lunches, that we have some place to recreate after we go to a night's game or before a night's game, that we can have a promenade, that there's life and activity along the forks, that we can generate commerce in that area and people living there too. So, I mean, when we hear that London Community Foundation worked pretty hard to spur the discussion about how can we have a conversation as a city about to create and enhance the focus of our city, where our city was settled. Why wouldn't we entertain and listen to them? And so, as a part of that, the city said, yeah, we'll be partners with you in that. And they went out and started a design competition, an international design competition, to say, let's hear some of your great ideas for what we can do with the core and what we can do with the forks. And also, by extension, other parts of the river leading to Soho, to Oxford, and to Springbank Dam. So that helped us create a One River EA. So we did an environmental assessment to take a look at how can we enhance the environment along the river. Took a look at how we can enhance housing, community development in Soho. How can we develop, and I mean, if the lightning rod for you is one bridge, which is one component of a pretty extensive plan, I think we've got some issues with that. And to take that out of this, I think Councillor Squire said if this was a motion to kill the Back to the River plan, I think that's exactly what this is. That's how I read it. I mean, with respect, I understand that, but that's how I read it, and I see that's the initiative. I mean, really, this isn't a game of checkers, this is a game of chess, and each move may not be an apparent right in its own right, but it absolutely has purpose, and it has a cumulative effect on how we build our core. The Economic Development Reserve Fund is the source of funding for that, and it has pretty clear restrictions on how it can be spent. I've heard some banding about in the media about what we could use that money for elsewhere. We can't. It's Economic Development Reserve, and that's exactly what this is doing. So the final form is still very much subject to the EA and the engineering, as we heard, but it's starting to get refined. I really like some of the things that have been proposed here, especially the amphitheater. I think that's neat. This is really a keystone to the Forks redevelopment and downtown's redevelopment. So let's not take rash actions right now that are going to have ripple effects and that we don't know, because I think they are going to be profound by pulling something like this out. Councillor Van Meerbergen asked, does this actually clean the river? Well, the millions of dollars we just spent on Dundas Place, that cleans the river because we're separating the sanitary and storm sewers, so we're not getting sewer bypasses going directly into the Thames. That's how we clean up the river. That's how we get people downtown, so we have development, so that we have taxes to be able to pay for that stuff, and we have a good river. So it's really easy to get headlines, but it's a lot harder to build a city. So let's keep moving forward with this, please.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question first to staff, and I heard the response to Councillor Squire's question about going to Soho first. And from what I understood from the response was we're pretty much complete the One River Master EA, but we would need to start, if we started in Soho, we would need to start a new EA for that project. Can you please give me some clarification on that answer?
Ms. Ramalou, would that be you? Let's start with you.
Yes, through the chair. So that is essentially correct. The One River Master Plan and the EA for the Forks of the Thames is nearly complete. At that point, if council so chooses, we will be in a position to move into detailed design and construction, again, if that's the will of council. And the environmental assessment that will be finishing has a lifespan of 10 years to start construction for that EA to remain valid. The Soho piece has not had the environmental assessment completed yet. That would be a separate piece.
Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you. That's what I thought I heard. So, you know, we can't start in Soho. That's, for me, that's very key. It's fine to say, let's start in Soho. We're 4 years away from starting in Soho, but we can start the Forks project right away. And to me, it makes very good sense to start at the Forks because that's where the city started. I think Councillor Turner touched on that, but the London Community Foundation spoke of honoring First Nations culture. And I think what people around the Horseshoe might not know is one of the board members on the London Community Foundation is a former chief of Oneida Nation of the Thames. And the First Nations communities, both in London and outside of London, were participants in the One River Master EA process. The Forks of the Thames is important to Londoners, and we forget the importance of the Forks of the Thames, but it is not lost on the First Nations communities around London, because that's where the London Township Treaty was signed. The river itself has very deep cultural, spiritual value to First Nations. It should have the same kind of importance in every Londoner's heart as well. The London Community Foundation spoke just at the very initial stage, starting the Back to the River project. The City of London put in $50,000, and immediately there was a 5 times private donations. So there were $5 for every $1 of public money. And, you know, I don't like to out myself politically very often, but I'm a conservative person. I know Councillor Squire doesn't believe me and doesn't agree with that, but I believe in public-private partnerships. This is exactly what we should be aiming for. We should be leveraging a small amount of public money to get a lot more private money, to get public buy-in. And that's exactly what this is. And we put $5 million on the table. And I know in the last council, we talked about, do we really want to set this money aside? Should we not just endorse in principle, but not necessarily put any money down? But we did, we put money down, and that brought in a lot of private donations. If we were to take that money away, it would be like playing a shell game. We put our $5 million on the table, we covered it up, we jumbled things around, and then we take it away. That's not fair to the community that is anxious to give their buy-in, to show their buy-in, to show their support for this project. This is one of 10 heritage rivers in the country. It's a very important river for Londoners, for the Indigenous people in the area, and for Canada as well. And I think that this project pays homage to the importance of this river. I think we're almost done. We're almost done the EA. We're ready to go forward with the inaugural project. Each and every little design project of the whole project will come back to us for a vote. So if people have concerns about the individual details of the overall project, that's where they can voice their opinion there. But I think to now take away the key project that we're about to start, and we're not ready to start the Soho project. And it's important that they noted Medallion also as a partner in this, because Medallion showed their enthusiasm for the project, showed their buy-in by investing in the Soho. And I encourage my colleagues to please vote against this amendment. We need to move forward with this. It's important for our community. It's a place where everyone can go free of charge, regardless of status or economic income or anything like that. It's a place for all Londoners.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Pelosi.
Thank you, Your Worship, and just looking for clarification through you to staff of the percentage completion of the Forks inaugural project. Is that, how do they measure percentage complete? Is it what was built? What would the EA completion be seen as a percentage of the completion? Like, what's their metric they're actually judging completion? Is it just hard infrastructure built, or is there other components wrapped into that?
Mr. Fleming?
Your Worship, my suggestion would be that that would represent 100% completion of the project as identified and conceived in the environmental assessment. So it's that portion of the project.
Any other comments or questions? Councillor Helmer.
Just on the amendment specifically, which is to drop the project from the strategic plan. I mean, that's what we're talking about doing, the specific Forks project. I wanted to listen to what the arguments were for getting rid of it. Certainly, we've dealt with this before at council, and I was convinced that it was a good idea to have it in the strat plan. I've supported it along the way. And I haven't heard anything tonight that makes me think that all of a sudden it's not a good project and we shouldn't have it as a priority. I want to make a comparison to another project that we did, because this is a sort of recreation and leisure infrastructure project, right? It's a public park, and we're talking about investing in a public park. We made a similar investment when we made the connection between over top of the railway in Kiwanis Park. And when we were approving the budget for that, which was about $1.9 million, I had some people emailing me and they're saying, why are you spending $2 million connecting a bike path in East London? Like, nobody uses it. We got other priorities. Don't do it. And I supported that project because people do use bike paths. When they're connected, people will use them more often. And this would connect people in that area all the way down to the Forks, which I thought was really important because we have a lot of great things already on the pathway, and this is making that connection happen. And, you know, some people in my ward travel east and they go over there and they use that bridge. I don't think it's a huge number of people. Some people do that. But what I do know is that now people have the opportunity to get connected to a lot of infrastructure that was already paid for, that already exists, that they were cut off from before. And I think these kind of investments, especially when we have a connected pathway system that's starting to get connected even more to more and more parts of the city, they're free of charge. You can use them no matter what kind of income background you've got. These are the kind of things that make the city that much more livable. That's the kind of thing that's distinct about our city compared to other cities. You know, there's only going to be one of these in the entire world, right? We build this particular thing, it's going to be unique. I think it's really important that we invest in that public space. Compared to some of the other investments we made, we've set up a whole bunch downtown. You know, we've put about $14 million into 4 residential buildings just in the last couple years. I'm talking about just the York building on King, which will probably be like 3.8 million. The Old Oak one on Richmond is 2.6 million. The Tricar one is 3.3 million. These are huge amounts of money going into supporting downtown intensification. What has to go along with the intensification is public space, right? That is part of the package. That's why people want to live in these areas. And this has the added benefit of being connected to all kinds of other areas of the city. You can come down from the university, you can come down from West London, you can come down from East London. You can get connected into this space from all over the city. It's really amazing. And I think it's going a long way in terms of value for money. This is a huge return on the kind of money that we're going to put into this project. And I think it sends a really good message, as Councillor Cassidy was talking about, to the private sector. There's very few parks where you have somebody saying, I'd like to put $2 million into your park. And if we can do this properly and do it in a way that encourages more of that, we could start to leverage all kinds of money going into public spaces, which I think over the long run is going to really pay off. But if we kind of muck this up and we say, well, you know, we don't want to do this project anymore, you know, even before we finalize the EA, I think that's going to send the wrong signal to people who are trying to mobilize private capital into this public infrastructure. And it's going to make it really hard to do any of that stuff for the next several years. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's going to make it a lot harder. And so I think it's an important project. I think it's a good value for money project. I think it's going to help us do other things in the community which are important. And I'm not convinced that there's anything wrong with what we've seen, that there's some big problem with this project. I know people in my ward are going to use it if we build it. And I know that people in other wards are going to use it if we build it. We put huge amounts of money into recreation infrastructure. We just built a community center in Southwest London that was over $20 million. Not everyone uses it, but lots of people use it. And that's why these things are important, is that different people use different kinds of recreation infrastructure. This one, I think, is important. That all being said, that's why I think we need to leave it in the strat plan. When it comes to the actual decisions around the EA and the budget and when we do it and how fast we do it, those are other decisions. Like, I'll have to look at what the actual costs are. Maybe we need to do some value engineering. Maybe we can't do it exactly how it was initially envisioned. And those are, I think, fine conversations to have. But in terms of should it be a strategic priority, I think it should be, and I hope people will vote to keep it in there, so vote against this amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I've got a few comments about this project. One, of course, it was a design competition, so we designed something that would look very impressive and great downtown. What I really wish we would have done is have a function competition, and I would like to do that sometime soon as well, to find out what do people actually want to go downtown to do, or down to the river to do, because our goal is to attract people down there. And I don't know that this is is really as great an attraction. I always like to think and ask the question, what else could we do with the same amount of money? And if we were to spend $7 million in order to attract people down to the river, we could give away $10,000 worth of pizza every weekend in the summer for the next 53 years. It's actually probably closer to 100, but I didn't have time to work out the pizza annuity. But there we go. There's something that might drag people down this way. I'm not suggesting that's a serious concern, but you realize that some people would come down for that. When I looked at the other projects, I saw that there were some less expensive and ones I liked better, really. The Penman's Perch was one that this group suggested. They also had a wonderful idea in it. They said that when people go for a walk, they want to look over there and then go to the next place. And so I would much prefer to save our money for a bridge and build the one that actually goes across the Thames for walking, because people could be at the Forks, they'd look at the Penman's Perch and walk over there across the bridge. They'd see the other bridge, walk by, and you'd have a nice circuit. It's almost a ritual that you go to, rather than this one thing where we're putting a great deal of money into it. There's ways we could spend that money and get, again, many more things. Honoring our indigenous populations was brought up, and one of the projects was a big longhouse, and I like the idea of that one as well. So I think we could get a lot more bang for our buck with some other choices. My problem with our council, and we run into this problem often, is that we see that we need to do something about a problem. We've got an aspiration. In this case, we want to bring people back to the river, and then an idea is proposed, and people have problems with the idea. Not everybody likes the idea, but then it's just a fight between whether or not we do or don't do the idea that isn't popular, rather than trying to come up with some compromise, which is something I was trying to do quite a few times during this process. Now, if I was just spiteful, I would vote this down and say, for that reason, I'm not going to support this. But I do think there's some value in voting I think there's value in doing a project at the river and doing some things at the river. I just don't think this is the value for money that Councillor Helmer is suggesting. And I like to be frugal. I like to think outside the box. And this box, even though it has a ribbon around it, is not the one that I want. However, I'll listen to the rest of my colleagues and decide how I vote on this.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And a quick question for you to staff on, I guess, the amendment that we have before us, which is to take the ribbon out of our strategic plan. And I'd like to know where this project, what this project would look like if we take the ribbon out. So where would we go forward?
Mr. Fleming, do you wish to tackle that?
Through the chair, so if we were, so there's two pieces to the project. So there is, of course, the ribbon overlook, and then there are also all the site works. And so just to clarify that, if that is in fact what you're referring to separate the two, okay. So that is possible. It would be the recommendation of engineering that if you think at all you're ever going to want to build sort of that iconic feature there, to design the full thing, and you could future-proof the site by installing foundations and so on, but then do that $4 to $5 million in site work separately and not build the remainder of the ribbon. But we would recommend, at least if you think you're going to want to do that eventually, to future-proof it by designing the full thing, and you could build the foundations. The footings, we have an estimate of a couple $100,000 plus some additional excavation and so on, so that could be done with the site works.
Further questions? Councillor?
Yeah, and I do have another question as it relates to the dam, because I know there was some figures, I think Councillor Lewis referred to the costs on the dam, and I understand that we have not made a decision yet if we are going to partially or fully decommission the dam. I just want a little bit of clarification.
Ms. Ramalou?
Sure, through the chair. So at this time, the recommended alternative that we presented at the PIC in October is the partial removal of the dam, which comes with a price tag of approximately $1 to $4 million. We are recommending in the report as a preview that we remove the steel gates from the base of the river. I realize that was a concern for Medi. So that's what we're looking at in terms of Springbank Dam.
Councillor?
Thank you. And if I can make a comment here. So I'm a little concerned here when I hear different figures being tossed out and we really don't have the facts. And that's a little concerning, because I am open to why we should cancel the ribbon. And I have not heard anything here that it says reasons, valid reasons. I appreciate the work Councillor Lewis has done, but I have concern that all those numbers aren't correct. And I think it's very, very important, if we're going to take something out and change the whole project, that we really understand what we're talking about. If we keep this ribbon in our strategic plan, and that's what we're doing here, what is the harm in that? There's absolutely no harm. And I just would like to add, getting back to some of the figures that I have heard, 200 million investment in downtown, that's amazing that we can do that as a city, and how we save the taxpayer money when we invest in downtown. That, to me, is something that we should be really proud of as a city when it comes to city building. And working with the community, there's money there on the table that they want to partner. They want to partner with us as a city moving forward with these projects. So those things are very, very important to me. Creating community space for everyone, I just do not understand why this is even a concern. It's about fixing our city. It's building our city for all of us. So I will not be supporting this amendment.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Morgan?
Thank you, Your Worship. So probably going to sound pretty frustrated on this one, because early on in the strategic plan process, Ms. Livingston said, don't get hung up on the metrics. And a lot of this debate is getting hung up on the metric, which we were told earlier in the strategic planning process, depending on the decisions we make in the budget process, the metrics are probably going to have to change to measure things accurately. And so the portion about the deleting a metric, I don't really see as a big deal, because the metrics are going to be identified and they're going to adjust based on what we're doing. I will say, my frustration is that this is a good example of one of those debates that becomes about something that isn't the words on the page, but about something else. There is nothing precluding us from proceeding with the project when we get the EA in the way that we want to proceed with it, because the strategic plan is identifying, our areas of focus, and then we fund and pace them. So I actually didn't see a significant problem with the amendment. Given the way the debate has gone, I think we're debating and we're voting on something that isn't the amendment anymore. It's become something more. And so I have to really think about like not voting for something that I think makes sense, because I've been burned in the past with votes that make a lot of common sense here that are interpreted by the community as meaning something completely different, very recently actually. And so I am not going to support the amendment, because I think we can proceed and still make many of the decisions that the councillors who want to debate these things can make, and it won't be precluded from keeping it in. So let me make clear. What we did was we had hydro dividend money, and we stuck it in the Economic Development Reserve Fund. And we said, guess what? We might want to do a project at the Forks of the Thames, put it in there, authorize spending on the EA, leave it there, but make sure there's a portion of the motion that says, we're not spending this money until we authorize it, right? That's still there. That's still going to happen. We're not authorizing any sort of projects until the EA comes back with the cost. And quite frankly, we shouldn't make a decision to authorize any projects until we know the actual costs of them. And then we can decide what projects we want to do and what we can't. I supported that process, and I continue to support that process because I think that's a responsible way to make decisions. We had a bit of a windfall of money. We set it aside for something we think we might seriously want to consider doing. And I think that was a good way to make decisions and a good way to keep us in a position where we would have something available. I didn't think it would take this long, but that's okay, right? Sometimes decisions may take a while. The other thing I will say I'm supportive of is this concept of leveraging private dollars in this space. And I think we have to be at the table for the site development portion of this project. Once I see the costs, I'll tell you how much of it I'm willing to support. The bridge and the ribbon, I'm not really interested at this point in spending a lot of municipal tax dollars on it. I do think it's a great project to fundraise for. I think that's one of those iconic things that people want to put their name on. And I think that there's a balance here that we can strike where we're at the table with significant municipal dollars to fund the site development structure, which includes things like erosion control, like stuff that we need to do at both this site and likely the Soho site. And we probably have more than enough projects to consume all of the money we've set aside for what are reasonable municipal priorities. And we can set up a situation where organizations and private donors can come to the table and fund some of that stuff that people say are nice to haves on top of that structure. And I would challenge back to the London Community Foundation, listen, the bridge got a lot more expensive. When you raised $2 million, it was a $2 million bridge. It's more now. So might be a great capital campaign if we're committed to moving forward with some sort of project there and being at the table. So I'm committed to still being at the table, but I want to make clear that does not mean I'm going to support every portion of this project when the EA comes back. I'm going to have very serious consideration of them and then a very serious discussion through the budget process and the pacing and timing of this project through that lens. And again, I'm frustrated this debate has turned into something it hasn't. I think it could have been a lot easier. I think that we actually are more aligned than this debate will end up articulating, but I'm not going to vote for something that's going to be interpreted as something different. So I'm not going to support the amendment. I'm going to proceed because I think all the options still stay on the table to allow the councillors to do what they want to do.
Thank you. Before the wrap, any other comments, questions? Councillor Van Meerbergen.
The comment I made earlier about the river needing cleaning up, I mean, it truly does. And why is that? I think Councillor Turner alluded to it a little earlier, that there has been some remedial work on the sewage system, particularly the combination sewer pipes off Dundas. So that's one part of it. But it's, as many of us know, it's a huge problem with these combination sewers, that every time we get a decent rain, you've got raw sewage bubbling up in the Thames because you get this overflow that comes out of these old antiquated sewer lines from, in many cases, from the downtown or the downtown area. So I fail to see the attraction of putting millions of dollars of tax money into this arch or walkway, whatever you want to call it, that sticks out in the middle of the river, to have something that quite often is stinky and unsightly. I don't see the attraction. I certainly don't think we're going to see busloads of tourists showing up to use this. There isn't support in the community for it at all. It's not seen as a priority, and we have so many other things that need to be done. So I think this amendment makes a world of sense, and it's worthwhile of support.
Thank you. Any other final comments or questions? For a wrap, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. And I will say, first of all, thank you to Councillor Pelosi. I know this is running us past our scheduled dinner break. And I want to start by saying, with all due respect to Councillor Cassidy, and I appreciated her letting me take the risk to die on Everest earlier today in our team building exercise. I disagree that we're not being fair to the community. I think when we have an election, it's absolutely fair for a new council to set new direction on things. That's why we have elections. We are investing in Dundas Place, and to Councillor Turner's comments, we have terminals at the Dundas Place Flex Street. We have Budweiser Gardens and we have the Central Library. And that's where the activity around Dundas Place will be centered around. Yes, $12 million for this work has become a lightning rod, especially $7 million for a lookout bridge when we have functioning bridges for traffic in this city. We have a backlog of $55 million in bridge repairs that are needed. So yes, it is about setting priorities. And when it comes to the perception in the community, certainly from the constituents that I hear from, this is not a priority for them. The infrastructure work, and you know, yes, it's an economic development reserve fund that we've put a hydro dividend in. We could have put that dividend into infrastructure as well. We chose not to at that point, but we're not married to this. To what Councillor Squire said right from the beginning though, this is about providing us flexibility here. This is about saying we don't have to do the Forks project first to make this work. We saw lots of pictures in the presentation from staff, and I appreciate the information Mr. Fleming and Ms. Ramlou have provided to us. But we saw pictures and comparisons to waterfronts like Burlington and Windsor, the Hamilton Harbor. These are not our waterfronts. In August, you can walk across the Thames. That is not the case in the Detroit River at Windsor, certainly, where the water is deep enough for them to have speedboat races, and it's a shipping channel. To make those comparisons is just simply not accurate. I'm not saying, and I made this clear at the beginning, I'm not saying that we should delete back to the river from the strategic plan. I'm saying that we should delete radiating from the forks, because we should have some flexibility in how we proceed with the river. I certainly, Councillor Hopkins, I hear what you're saying on the dam. The figures I was presenting were about flow removal. And certainly, one of the things that I heard when I was up there and listening to the debate around this horseshoe about the dam from our Indigenous community partners was take that dam out of the river. It doesn't belong there. That was one of the things that I heard loud and clear. And today, with the dam not functioning, we talk about bringing people back to the river. The Thames River anglers are a perfect example of people who have come back to the river because the river is getting healthier. We have people who are coming down to the river to bird watch and to check out the native species that are returning to this river. To me, the best thing that we can do to bring people back to the river is to let the river flow as naturally as we can, keeping in mind that there are dams upstream, there are things that are beyond our control upstream. But the best thing that we can do to bring people back to the river is to let the river run as naturally as possible and to let people use it as a natural feature, not as an entertainment site. How much garbage ends up in the river when we have Rock the Park in Harris Park? And I appreciate that we have Rock the Park, but stuff gets into the river from that. Is this really where we want, as we heard in the staff presentation, large gatherings of people? I respectfully submit that it's not. I don't want us to turn our back on the entire plan. I just don't want us to measure our success by making the Forks a priority. That's why I'm asking you to support this amendment. However this goes, we will have future discussions around the entire Back to the River project moving forward. And I ask that we all keep an open mind and keep the priorities of our community in mind.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Colleagues, there's an amendment on the table, duly moved and seconded. Debated. I will turn your attention to the screen as we vote. Pardon me?
Closing the vote and the motion is lost, 6-9.
Colleagues, it is now 7 o'clock. With your indulgence, we're a little bit delayed from our comfort break. I would ask that there will be some sandwiches next door. I'll ask that grab that. We'll be back in about 20 minutes, please, if we could. I know that's tight, but we'd like to move this along. So I'll look for a motion to recess. Councillor Hummer, seconded by Councillor Van Meerbergen. Let's do a hand vote on that. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much.
when you get the slide deck back up in front of you, is to discuss the recommendations from ANOVA and LOC. One of the things that council asked us to do, so here are those recommendations in front of you on the slide. Council also asked us that we report back on the results of seeking feedback from the community about this set of recommendations. We have provided that at your seats, but I'll quickly go through it. Folks were asked to provide feedback. These are the themes that were provided from that feedback that we received in terms of positioning London as a leader all the way down through to the prevention of violence. We also asked, just like we did for every other set of strategies, for people to let us know what was most important to them. So I'll just quickly highlight for you the kind of rank ordering of where that fell in terms of the set of recommendations. I believe there were 13 in total. And finally, we asked, as we did with all the rest of the strategies, if there was anything missing. Again, much like the feedback we received for the rest of the strategic plan, often these comments are either very specific or they are echoing support for the recommendation that's been put in front of council. So with that, we will now call up the document that ANOVA and LOC submitted, and council can proceed with their discussion about the set of recommendations.
First, I think I'll call on Councillor Sully.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If it's helpful, I'm prepared to move the recommendation as is presented from London Abuse Women's Centre and ANOVA and the stakeholders. And I'll just put that on the floor, and then I can enter into debate whenever you're ready.
Moved by Councillor Sully, seconded by Councillor Helmer. Comments and discussion. Councillor Sully.
So, I mean, I think from my capacity, I know this is my second term on. I want to apologize because I know they said for 4 decades they've been trying to push this forward. And, you know, as a man and as someone who tries to be the best ally they can, I think I should take some ownership in the fact that this wasn't done a lot sooner. So on my behalf, I apologize for that and apologize that this is something that is important that should be done a lot sooner, because this is over half of the population in our community and we need to do a lot more and we need to step up. So I'm happy to move this motion, and I'm hopeful that there'll be support around council to move this forward. I did have one question in the recommendation here. Because there was a comment made from Ms. Walker about annual reporting. Do you need to include that in this motion here, or will that be captured?
Thank you. To staff, please.
Your Worship, if council includes this as part of the strategic plan, then we would report out on 2 aspects, progress and ultimately performance, as we have in the last round. So it would be reported out just like every other aspect of the strategic plan.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, Councillor Sully? Then Councillor Hopkins, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a quick question to staff regarding one of the strategies is to implement or develop policies, bylaws, and programs. And I'm just wondering where that should go. Should it go to governance, or is that something that it would... What are we saying and what are we doing when it comes to developing policies and bylaws regarding the safety of women and girls, and how we make that a priority? I'm just trying to understand when we say we're going to do this, what happens moving forward?
Ms. Livingston.
Your Worship, this strategy, and I want to be clear, none of this is staff work. This is entirely from LOC and ANOVA, so I don't want to speak to the content, but I can tell you that what would happen next with these strategies is around the SLT table, we would determine who had accountability for each one, and then we would work with those strategies to establish a set of next steps as well as metrics, just like every other strategy. In a number of instances, we may need to meet with ANOVA and LOC to clarify the intent and make sure which of us is the owner of the strategy moves forward with the implementation as it was intended. But those would be the steps that we would be taking. I think this particular one that the councillor has highlighted around policies, along with a couple of others, speak to that bringing a gender lens to the development of policies and bylaws. This is quite specific around something. There are a number of other pieces that do that, but I think that's some of the intent there.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Thank you, Councillor Helmer.
I just want to say I support the motion. I do think that the language London Transit Committee just needs to be revised to say Transit Commission. That's very small. I want to thank Councillor Pelosa for what she said earlier. I thought it was really well said why we need to have this particular standalone piece in the strategic plan. I want to echo what Councillor Salee said, which is, you know, looking back on the previous strategic plan, I think this was an omission in the last one, and I think this is getting us closer to where we need to be as a community. I also think it's sort of taking a jump start on the community safety and well-being plan, which we're going to have to develop as a city in partnership with a lot of stakeholders in the community. That's going to talk about what kind of city do we want and what is our plan for community safety and well-being. That's a new requirement under the Police Services Act, as colleagues know, and it's something that the city and not the police service is the lead for. And so I think this is identifying in this particular area, male violence against women, some of the things we're going to have to do and need to be considered as part of that community safety and well-being plan. And I know we haven't even started that process yet. We haven't talked about it too much as a council, but I think this is really going in the right direction. I want to commend the people who brought this forward because, you know, a lot of times when you have specific strategies come forward from members of the public, they're not written in a way that really is going to be actionable or immediately can be included into the strategic plan. And I think they've done a very good job of identifying things that we can include directly in the strategic plan. I think some of them are going to require a lot more work, you know, as we figure out how are we going to do some of these things. I think a lot of them are in line with some of the good work that has been done already, including, for example, the gender lens, which, you know, other colleagues around the horseshoe were instrumental. Councillor Cassidy, Councillor Ridley, who's no longer with us here, really pushed those things forward, and I think it made a big difference, and we're starting to apply that now in decisions, which is a good step forward. I think these are all good ideas. You know, I had to go look up what this global Every Woman Treaty was, you know, before I thought, is this a good idea to be investigating signing it? It looks very interesting. I think there's merit in that, and I think all of these ideas are things that I can support as strategies for the city of London. So I hope my colleagues will support it as well.
Thank you, Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I echo Councillor Helmer's comments here, and thankful that this has been brought forward. I think, as we heard in the last go-around with this, putting a gender lens into our strategic planning was really important. It's really important that we have this being brought forward at this time as well. And I think Ms. Livingston might have answered the question that I might have in this, but that intent to be able to go back and work with the proponents of this wording to make sure that the wording is appropriate. I hate to do wordsmithing on the floor here, but there's a couple things that are a little nuanced that I recognize London as a sex trafficking hub. Interpretively might not, I recognize the intent for this, and is there a way to get that idea across that that shows that we want to be able to fix that and address it and resolve that. So those were the comments that I would have. Things Councillor Squire raised the point about the free service for LTC. Those are things that might be more challenging to implement. So where we have examples, is there more opportunity to have some latitude to explore how implementation of similar ideas and concepts, because we have gone quite a long way in terms of increasing access to lower income Londoners for transit, and free service goes quite a bit further from where that is. So those are discussions that I would hope have, no? So, okay, maybe through your worship, but if we're approving this now, we're approving it as is, and that's the way it goes forward.
To staff, please.
Your worship, for clarity, what you have in front of you are the recommendations from ANOVA and LOC. We did fix because I think it was honestly our bad on the commission. But if you're looking at changing substantive wording in the strategies, then I would respectfully request direction to go and do that. You won't finish your plan this evening. What I was suggesting we would work with ANOVA and LOC and perhaps others was on the development of the specific metrics, the next steps on how to move forward with these, but not to alter the wording at this point in time.
Thank you, Councillor Squire. Oh, I'm sorry, you're done, Councillor Turner? Sure.
Just really briefly, yeah, I don't want to impede the progress of it. I think that's what I'm really concerned about. I think the concepts are all there. It just hasn't been wordsmithed to the point that it goes into the strat plan in my perspective. So I don't know what the answer to that is. And I would maybe look to colleagues to help me out through that, because I think that's an important point if we're going to be bringing it into the strat plan.
Thank you. Noted. Councillor Squire.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, through you. I share sort of a similar concern with Councillor Turner, and maybe on a broader sort of basis. I was interested when I was asking questions about implementation. People were talking more about having discussion on these issues. And so I took it that a lot of these were things that did have flexibility to them, that if they don't work in terms of reaching some of the goals, that they can be enhanced or even removed. And it's a strat plan. It's a broad document, and I think we can work with it. I share some of the concern with some of the language in terms of our ability to even do some of those things. But in any event, I do want to recognize the people that I've worked with over the years in the justice system. Ms. Walker herself has been involved in the justice system at the courthouse on the ground for as long as I've been practicing law, which is probably about 35 years. I hate to admit that, but, and she's fought the fight. She's been there representing people, and I think that's what I respect more than anything. And I think that is always, for me, more important than what politicians may say around a table, because quite frankly, my experience in the justice system and in terms of representing people who have killed their spouses, I know that these are very, very complicated issues. These are very difficult issues, and there is no magic solution for them. So it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of effort. And I think the key people are the people on the ground who've made the changes. And I have to say that includes many men that I've worked with over the years. Yes, I acknowledge that men are the perpetrators of this violence. But on the other hand, the vast majority of men are involved in the fight to end this kind of violence and make sure that it's not condoned in our community, and particularly the work I've seen in the Justice Committee in terms of victim input and things such as that, and making sure people are safe after the charge is done. So I would prefer this not. I realize it's a problem with some men, but I would always stand behind the vast majority of men who don't want to see violence of any form, whether it's on women or anyone.
Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question to staff again, going back to the LTC one. So when we talk about, for example, longer hours and free service to low-income women, I wonder if that violates other legislation, human rights legislation, where we're making a distinction based on gender for the free transit service. I just want clarification on that.
Ms. Livingston.
Your Worship, I interpreted that strategy as the focus on the front end, which is to work with LTC to enhance the safety of women and girls on public transit, and then examples were given as how that might happen. I didn't interpret that as it must be this way. So I'm not in a good position to answer your question. Since that would probably fall under my area of responsibility, the first thing we would do would be to understand the range of options and then explore the risks associated with them and potential costs and all of those kinds of things. So in my mind, the strategy focuses on the front end and gives us some sense of where we might look, but it doesn't seem to limit it where we might go.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much through you to Ms. Livingston. Thank you for that response. So I just want to make a couple of comments. Number one, I want to thank Megan Walker and the London Abused Women's Center and Jesse Rogers and ANOVA for working together on this, for reaching out to the broader community. And there are a lot of organizations that do some really, really good work in this realm out there. And I think as other councillors have said, the quality of their recommendations coming forward sort of are a testament to that, the value in that collaboration. So I'm glad we took a little bit longer to make sure that we heard from the entire community, or as much as possible. I want to thank Councillor Lewis for making sure that Ms. Walker's initial communication with us was not overlooked. I'm very pleased to see this going forward. I'm very pleased to see the recommendations that they have made to this council. It's not good that they're necessary, but it's very heartening to see the work going on in our community to address this situation. Very pleased to hear the comments around the horseshoe here. I remember 4 years ago, kind of a different conversation. So this is a nice, a refreshing change. It's a different kind of conversation, but yeah, I'm grateful for my colleagues and the comments that have come through here. And again, the community has done a lot of hard work. And to Ms. Livingston and through you, Mr. Mayor, and your staff, rolling with this and, you know, sort of skating to where the puck is, you know, or where the puck's going to be and not where it is. My appreciation for all of your hard work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to our staff. If there's still work to be done in order to come up with the metrics, as I think has been suggested, then it seems that staff would also have time to look at the wording of these and this. Are we suggesting? I see there's an opportunity to refer this back to them to look at that. Would that be a helpful thing to do? Are we better off taking them as they are?
Ms. Livingston.
Your Worship, pardon me. I would just like to clarify, and it's why we provided Appendix B in your report, that the public strategic plan will highlight your vision, mission, and values, your strategic areas of focus, outcomes, expected results, and strategies. It will not articulate the metrics. The metrics help us in terms of reporting out to you on our performance on the strategies and how we're expecting to deliver on the expected result or outcome. The metrics also help us, and this is the connection to the multi-year budget, help us determine our business cases and what the proposed budgets will look like in the multi-year budget. They're not part of that nice, pretty document that will go out, which is why I'm reluctant to, if you want us to work with ANOVA and LOC on the wording, it will push your deadline out. That's what I'm trying to say. The work on the metrics we can do, and we can bring that forward to you as part of the multi-year budget. So I'm not concerned about that, but if you would like wording changes to what you have in front of you here, I would respectfully ask that you direct me to do that with ANOVA and LOC.
Thank you, and if I can continue, Mr. Acting Chair, I'd look to our city solicitor for any comments on the wording here. Is there something that might put us at risk the way this is worded?
Mr. Presiding Officer, there are some aspects of the wording that could be improved. As far as the Human Rights Code is concerned, there are provisions for affirmative action in Section 14 that can be examined. I would be happy to participate with Ms. Livingston in the review of the wording to come back with revised wording if that's the council's direction.
Any follow-ups, Councillor Van Holst?
Okay, well, thank you. So we're going to see some wording come back. So do we need to refer it back to staff in order to have some of those changes happen, or will it just happen within the sort of the due course of this project?
Is that a question?
I had hoped it would be, so through you, Mr. Chair.
Staff?
Through Mr. Presiding Officer, I would indicate that it will not happen in due course unless I am directed to go back and work through the wording with ANOVA and Locke. And I just want to be very clear that in the development of this, where my team met with Ms. Walker, the words that you see here were very deliberate.
The chair recognizes the mayor.
Thanks very much for being recognized. I'm very mindful of what is happening here, and I am absolutely sympathetic and empathetic to the direction that Locke is taking. I wasn't sure initially if if this was more appropriate as combining support for women and girls in the context of the current strategic plan, or having a separate strategic area, which is what obviously Locke wants. I'll be candid, I'd probably be more comfortable if we saw this this strategic component through the with review from our legal counsel and through Ms. Livingston, her department, just so that, because this is Locke's wording, and I think we're all empathetic, and I'll declare not a conflict, but a bias, having had my eldest sister who was brutally abused by her partner and then ultimately killed. So there's my bias right there. So as I support this, my only caution would be that we have it in the appropriate wordsmithing that's consistent not to change the intent of where Locke wants to go, but to make sure that as a city of London that we are appropriately, I hate to say the word covered, because that's not the word I'm looking for, but that it's just done appropriately. That would just be my suggestion, colleagues. And if that's a friendly amendment to have it done, and I'm mindful that that's some additional work that we may not be able to prove it tonight if that's the case, but I think this has to be washed a bit, and that's just a sense I have to make sure that this is done right. But if it's the will of colleagues to not do that, then I'll respect that as well.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair Feelgood, who ignored that little friendly commentary. I share Councillor Turner's concern, in particular about the language about recognizing London as a sex trafficking hub. I wonder if I'm going to offer some wording. I respect what I'm hearing from staff, that if we can offer some suggestion to that, that they're open to that. I wonder if we might consider this to say, recognize that sex traffickers have utilized London as a hub and take action, and then leave the rest of the wording as is.
Are you looking to comment on Councillor Lewis's comments, Councillor Helmer, or shall we just get some response for that? What's your pleasure?
I can wait.
To staff for that then, please. I think you're looking for some direction.
Your Worship, we're just going to put that up on, like any other suggestion that you've done with the strategic plan thus far, this is what we've done. We've shown you what it will look like, and then you can have a discussion about it.
So colleagues, just bear with us while we're doing that. I wonder though, I do know that Councillor Hopkins wanted to add a comment, and I have a small list here. Councillor Hopkins, please. No, you were first.
I do have a quick question through you to staff regarding if we did refer this back to get legal advice, just to make sure that we have the wording correct. How long would it take? Would we be able to get that information to us as opposed to spending the evening wordsmithing? I know that's another option, but just want to see if this can get back to us.
Ms. Livingston.
Your Worship, you do have a special SPPC meeting scheduled for the April 23rd, just ahead of the council. We were almost talking about not having to use that meeting. But if you wish us to undertake that, then I would work with Mr. Card and we would endeavor, and if you wish us to try and work with ANOVA and Locke on some of the language, then we would endeavor to do that and bring it back to that special SPPC meeting. I'll just note that only 1 hour is scheduled for that meeting. It was meant to be a big stamp on a good plan ahead of the council meeting at
No
4.
doubt it will be a good plan, in fact, a great plan, I suspect. But I'm hearing a suggestion from staff with respect to that I think we need to respond to, and that is the issue with regard to the amendment. And I wonder if, Councillor Lewis, since you put it forward, would you be comfortable with why don't we see what kind of an amendment you might put up there for us to review, and then we'll determine from there if that makes some sense, if we could, please. Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. I'm sensing some hesitation around the language around the transit ones in particular, and I want to just comment on that because I think the language is fine. And the reason I think that is because there's a lot of different ways of accomplishing the objective that has been articulated, right? Enhancing the safety of women and girls on public transit. So that's the objective. That's what Ms. Livingston has mentioned. You know, this is sort of the strategy. And there's different ways, and they give a couple of examples. And I think people are reading the language to say, for example, that you wouldn't provide free service to low-income men, right? So you read it, and it says free service to low-income women. Well, we've already done some things around improving access to transit for low-income Londoners, and that benefited a lot of low-income women. In fact, women make up the majority of transit riders. We know that from surveys. And so when we lowered the cost down to $52 a month, for example, lots of low-income women benefited from that. One of the ways of dealing with that would be to take it to zero. I mean, I don't actually think that that's a great idea, but that's one way of doing it. For all low-income Londoners, we could lower it down even further. We could also tell people that if you're in fear for your safety, get on the bus and you don't have to pay. Don't worry about it. Anybody who's fearing for their safety, and unfortunately we know that a lot of people who are fearing for their safety are women. And so yes, it would benefit lots of women. If there was a man who was fearing for his safety, he could get on the bus as well. So there's ways of handling it that they don't activate any kind of concerns around human rights, you know, and there's ways of accomplishing that objective. And they're not necessarily even expensive ways. And I can tell you that bus drivers now, they'll let people on the bus and they don't have to pay if they're running away from somebody. I mean, like, people do the right thing now, absent all kinds of policy to support it. And what I think they're trying to get us to start thinking about this issue. And I can tell you, Councillor Squire knows this because he's on the Transit Commission with me. We're already working on this stuff at the Transit Commission. We've started to survey people about how do you feel in terms of safety on the bus, at bus stops. We get results based on people's gender and the responses, and we see that there's differences. You know, people feel safe at bus stops. We're asking them, have you been approached by people? Are you experiencing unwanted contact? And we're starting to develop strategies to address that. So I think this is very much in line with what we're already doing at the Transit Commission. It can be accomplished without activating any kind of concerns around, you know, the Human Rights Code and are we treating people fairly. And I think anything we can do to encourage people to use public transit as a way of escaping unsafe situations is a good idea. You know, so I think, you know, I don't want to get caught up too much in the language. It's an example. I don't think it involves what people are worried about. And I would just support it. I think there is time between now and tomorrow if you want to talk to Locke and ANOVA about some other language that maybe would adjust it, but I don't want to refer it because I think the language is fine. They spent a lot of time coming up with the specific language, and I think it's very good as it is.
So can I mention there is a mover and a seconder for the original motion, and I haven't heard as much as we've talked around some ideas of potential for amendments. That's not been accepted by the mover nor seconder, and to be fair, not really formally introduced. So unless there is a request to formally introduce some changes, while we're asking Ms. Livingston and Ms. Wilcox to madly go through some options there. Councillor Sally, are you doing a wrap on this of your motion, or it looks like, folks, we've gone once around and in some cases twice around. We want to move this along, so I'll allow people to be brief, but they've got to be brief, please. Councillor Sally.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I guess it might be helpful for the debate. I think, you know, this is going to be the only part of our strategic plan where we're asking for legal advice. You know, so I think I appreciate the apprehension, and I understand the feedback. But I also recognize that when we talk about the gender lens, we had that years ago, when that was introduced. And when we talk about the discounts that we offer to our seniors that we've done for decades and things like that, that's nothing new. No one has challenged this. Again, these are things that I think we can do. I think the intent behind what the grassroots members wanted to see was that language to be very clear. I recognize that when we changed to recognize London as a sex trafficking hub, that kind of changes the intent of what they wanted, which is to say, we recognize our wrongs and being a city that is what it is, and so let's fix it. So I think if we change that wording, I think it might change intent. I can't speak for Mrs. Walker, but she, as you know, was a city council before. She's very deliberate, and the team around her knows exactly what they wanted to bring forward, and that's why I wanted to move it as is and not make changes, and recognizing that anything we can do will always be challenged, perhaps by people, on a legal side. But I think with this, I think we're really safe, and I think we're overthinking it.
Noted. So I'm not hearing an appetite for the mover and seconder to consider an amendment to this. That doesn't mean there can't be, but I have Councillor Van Holst and then Councillor Lewis. Brief comments, please.
Well, thank you. Well, I think in the discussion, there was a request that we look at all our policies through a gender lens and these various lenses. And I don't have a problem with having our staff look through this under a staff lens and pushing this off to the 23rd. So I'd be happy to move referral for that purposes.
So that's either an amendment that would be friendly accepted by council. It is not. So is there a seconder to that amendment? Motion to amend. Seeing none. Thank you. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. And while I appreciate the fact that you want to move the debate along, it is important to remember at committee, folks can bring forward issues as many times as they want. In this case, I do want to bring forward a formal motion to amend.
Sir, Councillor Lewis, respectfully, what I'm trying to do is avoid repetition, but I appreciate that everyone has the right to their views, so please proceed.
I do at this point want to move a motion to amend that one strategy because I think it speaks poorly to London as a city. So I want to have that piece recognize that sex traffickers have utilized London as a sex trafficking hub, all of the rest of the language stays the same, but recognize that sex traffickers have utilized, add that in. And I'll look for a seconder for that.
Bear with me. So to be clear, you're at the several points down where it says recognize London as a, so what is your exact wording, please, so it's clear to us?
I believe staff have it now, but recognize that sex traffickers have utilized, and that completes, the rest of the language stays the same.
Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Van Holst, any comments or questions? Well, let me ask you, would that be considered a friendly amendment? It would not be. All right. Comments or questions with respect to this? I think Councillor Turner and then Councillor Helmer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Really quickly, and I thank Councillor Lewis for working to try and do this. I think one of the challenges is that our colleagues have put forward some wording that they think is important. And that's why I'm really reluctant to make the changes to wording that without their input into it. And like if I were to say it, I would say that we would work towards solutions to ending London's status as a sex trafficking hub, which just flips it, uses the same words. But again, I can't speak on behalf of the agencies that have put this forward, and I don't think that's appropriate. So I'm sorry for raising it. I thought it was important because I thought there was some massaging that could be done. It sounds very difficult to do without really kind of imperiling it. I think it has been probably very significantly considered in the wording that's been brought forward to us by the agencies. So I can support that. And I'm glad Ms. Livingston said that the interpretation of the examples weren't mandates. Because I think that's important too, to say that these are things that we would consider as options. But I don't want it to be directive or exclusive and tying our hands from being able to do the work that might be able to help interpret these clauses and advance them. So I think those are really important. If it's in the interest of being able to bring this forward and have it, then I'm supportive as it is. But I think could have used a bit of massaging.
Thank you. Speaking to the motion to amend, Councillor Helmer.
So I'm going to try one more time. I think if we want to make adjustments to this language, we have an opportunity to do that before council or at council tomorrow. I think in retrospect, we had the delegation in front of us, and if we wanted to adjust the language, it probably would have been good to ask about that when they were here to talk to us directly. In the absence of that, I think talking to Ms. Walker and a number of the other folks from Innova and these other organizations would be the best thing to do in terms of adjusting this language. I agree that the way it's written, it kind of sounds like this is a permanent thing, that it's going to constantly be a sex trafficking hub, which I don't think anybody wants, and we don't want to send that message. But the suggestion that Councillor Lewis has made, for example, it makes it sound like it's a problem that's in the past, which it is not, right? Because it's now in the past tense. And so there's, these kind of wordsmithing things can have ripple effects and unexpected sort of interpretations. That's why I think it's important that we talk to people who are real experts in this area. I know that Locke and Innova, for example, they work very closely with the police who work in this area. I think there might be a very specific reason why they want this language the way it is. So I think it's just better to pass it at committee the way it is, talk to Locke and Innova between now and tomorrow. And if there's an adjustment that needs to be made that's going to make it better overall, it sounds like there's a lot of support for it. So I think that's what we should do.
Colleagues, I should mention, this isn't going to be going to vote tomorrow. We're going to be taking this to the SPPC meeting on the 23rd. I believe that's to council meeting on the 23rd, just so that we're aware of that. Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, Your Worship. Very quickly, with respect to the comments from Councillor Turner and Councillor Helmer, I'm prepared to withdraw my motion. I can have that conversation with these organizations and help staff move this forward, so I'll withdraw it at this time.
So noted. Thank you. We have a motion on the floor. Any other comments with respect to the motion on the floor? Then this is now not an amendment to the motion. This is actually the motion. Duly moved and seconded. In a moment, we'll call the question as we turn your attention to the screen.
Councillor. Yep. Wait a second.
I'll vote manually yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 15-0.
Thank you, colleagues. Ms. Livingston.
Yes, Your Worship. So that takes us to the third and final approach for this evening, which is to, pardon me, ask if there are any further changes that council wish to see in the draft strategic plan. The appendix that was attached to your report encompasses all of the changes that were made last day, so I'm wishing to understand if there are anything further.
Thank you. I'll ask if there are any amendments. I can tell you the chair has one. Councillor Morgan, would you mind taking the chair?
I will recognize the mayor.
Thank you very much, colleagues. This was distributed last week, some proposed amendments and associated metrics related to jobs and transit. And I've not had any comments from colleagues, but let me go through them if I can. The first is that the following new strategy and related metrics be added to growing our economy, the GOE section. The strategy, quote, to increase the employment rate for Londoners who are not currently participating in the workforce. Metrics being the following. Number one, the percentage of Londoners ages 25, it said 24, but apologies, it's 25 to 64. That's the Stats Canada information, who are not employed. The second, London's participation rate. And the third metric is London's unemployment rate. The second is that the following new metric be added to strategy BSC 29, which is support Londoners to access affordable public transit where they live and work. And the metric would be the percentage of service hours improvements to industrial areas. That relates to transit and jobs. The third is that the following actions be taken with respect to strategy GOE 23 be amended to read as follows. Improve administrative and regulatory processes and bylaw requirements to enhance London's competitiveness. And the metrics be amended by adding the following new metrics. First, to the number of building processes reviewed and improved, the number of development processes reviewed and approved, the percentage of building permit applications reviewed within legislative timeframes, and the percentage of development applications meeting Planning Act timeframes. The fourth, and I'm going to be pulling this out separately, Chair, because it has to do with downtown and will be a separate vote because of a conflict of one of our colleagues, at least one of our colleagues, that the following new strategy and related metrics be added to building a sustainable city. The strategy, replacement of surface parking with an efficient, convenient, and cost-effective parking public resources to support business, personal, and social activity in the downtown, and that's the downtown parking strategy, with those metrics to be determined. And number 5, finally, that strategy GOE 11 be amended to read as follows. Undertake regional planning partnerships with neighboring municipalities and promote regional connectivity. And that has to do with transit, jobs, and regional. And I would like to move strategies 1, 2, 3, and 5 with associated metrics.
Thank you for that. Is there a seconder for that move? Councillor Salih? He was faster than you, sorry. So what we can do is have debate. Now, just for clarity, the mayor has only moved a portion of the things that he's mentioned. He's keeping 4 out. So that's what will be on the table for moved and seconded. Discussion. Councillor Lewis.
Mr. Chair, I think that Councillor Sally just thought that we were adjourning. That's why his hand was up so quick. I just want to thank the mayor for including the regional component in this motion. I think it's very important that we work with our partners in neighboring communities to develop strategies that work for jobs across the region.
Any other discussion? Seeing none. Oh, Councillor Turner.
Thanks. I think these ones are fairly, these are ones that we measure as we go already. These are fairly routinely reported metrics, so I don't have too many problems with them. When we talk about percentage of service hour improvements to industrial areas, I think that's important, but I think we also need to recognize that we decreased potential service hours to tens of thousands of jobs when we're looking at hundreds of jobs in the industrial areas. So I recognize the desire to be able to service that, and that's something that's certainly within LTC's plans to be able to help improve those things. I think number 4 is where I'm probably going to have some questions and more debate, but at these times I think these are fairly routine. The one that would concern me a little bit is 3A, which just disappeared. On the screen there for a second, which is specifically with the ability to improve administrative and regulatory processes and bylaw requirements to enhance London's competitiveness. Sometimes that gets translated as let's get rid of some of the things that are really important, like environmental protections. And I hope that's not the intent of this, and I don't think it is, but often when I see that from other governments, it's code for let's get rid of other stuff. And if it's true in its intent to improve efficiency in terms of making sure that we still uphold the other standards that we have through this, then I can be on board with that.
Further comments? Councillor Helmer.
Yeah, I think these are good changes. I'm glad to see the mayor bring them forward. I think, I'm not sure I agree with the premise of what Councillor Turner is suggesting, as though regulations that protect the environment are bad for competitiveness. I don't agree with that. I think they're very supportive of competitiveness. So I think, you know, how these things get interpreted is important. We've already been working on some of these processes. When I first read it, I thought, Mr. Katolik is gonna be like another business licensing bylaw review coming up, that would be a bit much. But, you know, we've actually spent a lot of time trying to simplify the regulations, you know, delegate more authority to staff around business licensing, you know, change how we're doing some of those things, allow, you know, things like food trucks. There's been a lot of things that have changed that are exactly in line with what is being articulated here. And I think, you know, putting it in the strategic plan is drawing a bit more attention to it, which I think is helpful. And there are some areas where we have some processes that still need to be reviewed. I think this is one thing that needs to be looked at. And so I support all of these ones. I also, we haven't talked about 4 yet, but when we get to that part, I support that too. That's right out of the downtown parking strategy. And I think it's something people are concerned about. And so putting it there and putting a highlight on it, I think is very smart. You know, that it's not just take away, it's replace with better. So.
Further discussion? I'd offer a wrap up to the mayor, but it seems like everybody's on side, so use that cautiously.
If I had a heart, it would bleed. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, colleagues. I think the intent to comment on Councillor Turner's concerns, that is absolutely not the intent. And I think our whole approach to them, there's no code here. It's I think the metrics are intended to be exactly as we see them to be. We talk about the focus being on jobs and transit. And as Councillor Lewis recognized as well, the issue about regional transportation. I will tell you that I was in a meeting on Saturday with Minister Urick and Minister of Housing, Steve Clark. And these were mayors of Elgin County, and they talked about, for example, the Wellington Gateway project in very positive terms, to the point that that St. Thomas is looking, and some of the mayors that are east of St. Thomas looking to use our park and ride component. They like the idea of focusing those southern areas, certainly the one at Wellington, and potentially if there is going to be one to the east of that, as hub opportunities to get people to work and back. And I was reminded by the mayor of St. Thomas that there are some, I think, 3,500 folks from St. Thomas, which might be their total workforce, I'm not sure, but that actually work in London, and that the approach to our regional approach to transportation was well received. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to put these forward.
Great. With that, comments are done. We will open this for voting. You can't vote there, Mr. Mayor. We'll switch seats and vote in our proper spots.
Councillor Van Holst. Closing the vote, and the motion carries 15-0.
And Mr. Mayor, I believe you wanted to move number 4.
Yes, thank you very much. I'd separately like to move point 4. We've already discussed it. So rather than go through this all again, I'm putting that forward as a motion. Look for a seconder.
So I'll look for a seconder. Councillor Cassidy. Councillor Lehman.
I will recuse myself, pecuniary interest, as I have a business downtown.
Okay, thank you. Discussion on item 4. Councillor Turner.
Sorry, again, I don't have access to the wording here, so I have to kind of...
If you're on the screen and you hit current item,
okay,
and you scroll down, you should be able to find items 1 through 4. It's not all the way at the bottom because they've been voted on separately, but there was a motion moved by Mayor Holder and M. Sally. It's item 11 in that list on the side. If you can.
Thank you. It's up on screen now. It just has been migrating back and forth, so that's the challenge. And I kept to keep changing screens to follow it. Number 4 is the replacement of surface parking with efficient, convenient, and cost-effective public parking resources to support businesses, personal and social activity in the downtown. And I think that's absolutely right. The question is, to what extent do we put public resources into this? And that's my concern with it. I think we absolutely need to be moving away from surface parking and make it efficient and convenient and cost-effective. It's the public part that says that we're going to be committing lots of money to this, or some funds to it. And I guess perhaps through you, Mr. Presiding Officer, to the Mayor, if he could just expand on that a little bit about what the intent in that is.
Mr. Mayor.
Thanks very much, and I appreciate the question from Councillor Turner. I think we all recognize the need. The question is, I think rightly, is how do we pay for that? And there may well be options there. The fact that we put this into our strategy means that as we consider our four-year plan, we now have an opportunity to consider options with respect to what our need is downtown. And I can just generally say that it's very clear the need is there, but I think we also have an opportunity to look at private-public partnerships. I think those options are all there, colleagues, on the table. And that's why the metrics to be determined were left generally there. The reason that I think this is so important is it relates to two things that are significant. One is the issue around transit, and the second is the issue around jobs, and they're both interrelated. And certainly one of the concerns that we've heard expressed in downtown is the need for significant need for parking. And as a result of that, I thought it had to be added in terms of building a sustainable city as a strategy. And as I say, the metrics we will work through and feed that back through colleagues to council. But I think the options of whether that's of how that gets paid, including public-private partnership, I think that's absolutely open and a reasonable consideration to have.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you. I appreciate the explanation there. I think Councillor Helmer alluded, I don't have the parking strategy right by comparison, but I'm not sure if this is wording straight out of that or if this is wording that was crafted for the motion here. For me, it would be alleviated by just striking the word public. And it would address the same thing, and it would allow for those latitudes and exploration of options of how it's funded.
Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. It feels like Councillor Turner and I are going to have a discussion about the parking strategy. So through the chair, it is very similar to what's in the language of the parking strategy. The parking strategy says replacement of existing surface parking lots with new development. So first of all, build buildings on existing surface parking. But then to include in new developments, public parking as part of those new developments. And we just had that happen with York Street, for example, the York development on King. They're looking at putting in 40 public parking spots as part of the development. And that was about a $2 million bonus that they provided, and it's right in line with the parking strategy. So surface parking spots along King Street are removed, public parking spots are provided in the building on King. And those are better parking spots. They're more expensive parking spots, and some of them are paid for by the city and some of them are paid for by the developer. And in this case, that's all on the developer, even though they're public parking spots. So this strategy is not saying anything about public finance. Actually, it's saying that the public parking spots need to be provided, because private parking spots aren't going to benefit people if we're taking away public surface parking, right? So I think that's the balance, and I think it's in line that the parking strategy is a very long document, as everyone knows. It gets into all the details. In terms of what's in the strategy, I think this is good language.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Officer. Just as a point of clarification, to nuance the word public, I'm making the interpretation of public meaning publicly funded, not publicly accessible. And I think that's where the difference is. I completely agree with if the interpretation is publicly accessible, then it's fine if it's read that way. If the interpretation is publicly funded, then I think that's where my challenge lies.
Further discussion. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much. I think I'd prefer to see just the creation of efficient, convenient, cost-effective parking. The replacement of surface parking kind of means to me that it's destined to disappear. And of course, brought up a point previously that service parking can be valuable to us. I brought up the point previously about it being a valuable thing for the film industry. And actually just last Friday, actor, producer, director Ted Raimi was here at the city describing to staff some of the strategies for being attractive to TV and movie productions, and one of those things mentioned was is parking, having parking that can be available. So I'd just like us to keep that in mind. It isn't an all bad thing.
I'll use the chair's prerogative. Mr. Kotsovitz was trying to get his hand up. I just need to see if there's any valuable information that he has.
Through the chair, that's a pretty tall order. So in the parking strategy itself, we do use the word public quite often, but it is referencing publicly accessible parking spaces. It's not about the funding strategy. We are currently working on the funding strategy, and that'll be coming forward as part of the multi-year budget. But that could involve a multitude of options, including, as the mayor mentioned, public-private partnerships and others, fee increases, special levies. There's all sorts of different considerations and different models that are out there that we're exploring to see what would be the best fit for London. We'll be bringing that forward later this year.
I see no other speakers. Are there any? Seeing none, then I'm going to open that for voting and then hand the chair back to the mayor.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 14 with 1 recuse.
Thank you, colleagues. I was not made aware of any other amendments. I did ask the question if there were any other amendments. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to add one to the Building a Sustainable City Outcome 4, expected result, increase access to transportation options. And this one would be provide priority, I think I provided something to the clerk.
Could you give us the page reference number if you have it there, just to make it easier?
Okay,
to
this is
follow?
page 30. And it was provide priority to transit with use of dedicated HOV or reversible lanes. And the reason I'm going to suggest we put this in the strategic plan is that on our west leg, we kind of came to an impasse in terms of what to do with transit, and I think some of these other options might be a way for us to move forward to provide priority to the transit vehicles that are moving along there. The staff told us that unfortunately it's not something we could do to apply for funding. Because it had to be those things had to be in the transportation strategy or the transportation master plan. And so our Civic Works Committee had a motion at the last meeting to have staff start on that process so that in a couple of years, that option would be open to us. But in the document they submitted to the province, it said that we could apply for projects that are consistent with the land use or transportation plan or strategy. And by putting those things in a strategy, which is this one, we might be able to look at that even sooner. So
thank you. Is there a seconder? Seeing none. Any other amendments to be considered? Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I see that we've received added suggested changes to strategic plan metrics by Sandy Levin. And I don't know if my colleagues have had an opportunity to look at the changes suggested by Mr. Levin as it pertains to strengthening our community. And I would like an opportunity, maybe through you, Mr. Chair, just ask staff if they've got any comments or concerns about the suggestions made by Mr. Levin.
Would staff wish to comment on that? Mr. Stafford?
Sorry, through the chair, just one moment to pull those up.
So noted. We will hum while we're waiting.
Through the chair, it involves Mr. Fleming and I both, so we're just going to have a quick second to have a look at these. Thank you.
While staff's reviewing that, Councillor Helmer.
I wonder if through the chair, if I might suggest to Councillor Hopkins, it seems like almost all of Mr. Levin's feedback is about the metrics, which, as I have learned very slowly in the process, is they're not going to be included in the strat plan that we're finalizing at the end of April. And there's going to be additional work on the metrics. I think there's a lot of merit in what Mr. Levin is suggesting. You know, are we measuring the right thing? You know, the benthic quality is probably more important than the number of samples. I think that's very reasonable, but we're going to be dealing with the metrics ongoing. So I wonder if we don't need to sort it out right now, and whether we could have that conversation between now and when the metrics are finalized and the multi-year budget is finalized, which Ms. Livingston has brought up a couple of times, and I think I've heard her on that.
Are you comfortable with that, Councillor Hopkins? Any other further comments from staff on this?
Through the chair, I think we've had a look at it. We're fine. Again, there are adjustments to the metrics, and we'll look at the metrics. So Councillor Helmer was correct in his assessment there.
So noted. Ms. Livingston.
Your Worship, unless there's anything further, that concludes my time at this podium.
Well, before we say thanks, we have a little vote to do here. I'm going to look for a motion to receive 3.1 with its various delegations, communications received, and amendments. We've discussed all of this. Is there a mover? Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Lehman. Any other comments or questions? As we call the question. Do we need to separate any of them?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we have placed it all in one motion, but there are a number of conflicts. So what we're going to have to do is separate them out. So if you look to your screen, I believe the overall motion is up. So you'll notice that A is approving the revised strategic plan with the exception of SOC 12, 13, and 21. And that is because there are some conflicts. B is approving SOC 12 and 13. C is approving GOE 21. And then the remainder of it is receiving all the communications.
So it appears that the chair's efforts to streamline this through hasn't worked as effectively as thought. So in the spirit of that, then why don't we, I'll look for a motion to approve A, which has some exceptions in it, as you have read. Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Turner. Any comments or questions? We are looking at A, colleagues. Then we'll call the question. Your attention to the screen, please.
Councillor Van Meerbergen. Closing the vote in the motion. I'm showing Councillor Helmer and Lehman have not voted. I don't see anything. Can you give me manual vote?
Yes, I can.
Closing the vote in the
Councillor
motion
Helmer?
carries 15-0.
It looks like it was unanimous. Thank you. Colleagues, now, we'll turn your attention to B, and I'll look for a mover and a seconder, please. Moved by Councillor Kayabaga, seconded by Councillor Morgan. Comments, questions? Turn your attention to the screen, please.
B has to do with childcare matters. That's because it was in the original motion. All of it is all in one. Okay, I'll indicate what they are. So this is childcare matters. So anyone that had a conflict on childcare matters. Closing the vote and the motion carries 13 with 2 recused.
Thank you, colleagues. I'll now turn your attention to C and look for a mover. Councillor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Pelosa. Any comments, questions? I'll turn your attention to the screen, please.
And your worship, this is Councillor Lehman's conflict with respect to downtown.
So noted. Thank you.
Councillor Van Holst. Closing the vote and the motion carries 14 with 1 recused.
Thank you, colleagues. I'll look for a motion for D. Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Hillier. Comments or questions? Clerk?
And your worship, Part D is Councillor Lehman's conflict with respect to downtown parking.
Noted. Thank you. I'll turn your attention to the screen, please.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 14 with 1 recused.
Thank you, colleagues. I'll now turn your attention to 4 items for direction. Now, I would like to do 4.1 through 4.7, but I suspect we may have some conflicts here. So let me put that on the table and ask if there are any items through 4.1 through 4.7 that from your standpoint need to be, as a result of pecuniary interest, need to be taken out and voted separately. Councillor Turner?
We could pull 4.1 separately.
4.1, any others? Councillor Helmer?
think I just have a question, so I don't think I need to pull it separately. That's fine.
Any other comments from colleagues? So turning your attention to 4.1 and request that Councillor Morgan be appointed as council lead for the 2020 to 2023 multi-year budget. Is there a mover? Councillor Hopkins, seconder. Prior to this? You can wait. Okay, thank you. Sorry. Moved by Councillor Lehman, seconded by Councillor Hillier. Comments or questions? Councillor Hopkins?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm not sure who can answer this, maybe Councillor Morgan, or I just want to understand exactly what council lead entails, a little bit more of a job description. I just want to understand what we're doing here and what we're approving.
Excuse me, are you talking about in terms of 4.1 through 4.7? We're dealing with 4.1 right now. The specific issue with respect to appointing Councillor Morgan as lead for the multi-year budget.
Yes, that's what I've got a question on that.
Yeah,
what
yes,
exactly
please.
does
Well, what does that
lead mean?
entail?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'll give you some, well, actually, I shouldn't unless I move myself from the chair. Councillor Morgan, could I ask you this? You might sound conflicted, but I wonder if it's appropriate if we might ask Councillor Morgan, who actually did the first multi-year budget, and then, if you all recall, handled the most recent year, the final year of the multi-year budget for us. Would you explain that process a little bit for the benefit of colleagues, if that's not a conflict to do that?
No, it's not a conflict. To answer Councillor Hopkins' questions, this is the same language we used for the 2019 budget, and so I would anticipate doing very similar things to the 2019 budget, which included a range of stuff: chairing meetings, liaising with staff. In one case, council actually tasked me to go out and work on a project and bring some information back. I would anticipate in the multi-year budget process, it would entail, assisting our staff with anything that they would need, but certainly no decisions would ever be made or any actions would be of significance would be taken without any sort of, council direction. So I think the language is there because it's the same language that was used last time. And so my approach would be very much as it was with the 2019 budget. I'm not sure if that helps or not, but.
Thank you for that. I think a bit of clarification is always good. But for me, I'm very mindful too that I've got to do my due diligence as a councillor here, getting the information as well. I want to acknowledge the extra work that Councillor Morgan will be doing here too. So thank you for that.
So noted. Other comments or questions? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Morgan's done a quite good job over the past two rounds that he's done this. I wasn't sure if there was opportunities, if there were other people that might be interested. I'm not interested, but that's I think in this opportunity, if there's a chance for somebody else who wanted to step up to be able to do that, that's why I was a little concerned with it just kind of being a bit more of a formality more than a discussion.
I think that's a fair point, and I'm not sure that Councillor Morgan wouldn't take back the thought if someone working with him to get more comfortable with. This is a critically important part of what we do, and I think Councillor Hopkins has already pointed out we make our own decisions, but the principle of this is to have someone be the lead as we work through the multi-year budget. Any other comments or questions? Colleagues, seeing none, then I'll turn your attention to the screen as we vote, please.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 15-0.
Thank you, and congratulations, Councillor Morgan, I think. Appreciate it. Colleagues, there was no request to pull items 4.2 through 4.7, so I'll look for someone to move that. Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Helmer. Comments or questions with respect to these items? Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. I just want to ask about 4, 5, part 2, the direction to the city clerk about bringing forward amendments to the procedure bylaw, about allowing people to participate in debate when they're not members of the committee. That's come up before. I knew it was going to governance working group. I didn't go to governance working group, which felt great. But now it's here, and I'm still not convinced that this is actually a problem. We have non-members speaking at committee all the time. And I know it has been a problem in specific circumstances in the past, but I'm not sure that it really requires amendments. So I don't want to repeat the whole governance working group piece. I just wanted to say I'm going to support this direction. I'm probably going to go to the discussion about that because I'm interested in hearing what the public has to say about it. I'm interested to know what all my colleagues think about it because I'm not sure that it's really a problem.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, if I can just perhaps provide a little clarification for Deputy Mayor Helmer. Our working group, the intent was we don't want this to become a problem again. We recognize that it hasn't been this term and that committee chairs have been very good about that, but we realize that it's been a problem in the past, and so we want to be proactive and fix a problem before we have one again.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Then colleagues, seeing none, I'll turn your attention to the screen as we vote.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 15-0.
Thank you. I'm not aware of any deferred matters or additional business, so I'll look for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Sally, seconded by Councillor Van Meerbergen. I will do a hand vote on that. All those in favor? And I thank you, and I will say as we depart that I wanted to acknowledge Ms. Livingston, Ms. Wilcox, and the team for a great effort in helping us through the strategic plan. Not quite done yet, but we're getting close. We appreciate all of our staff and their efforts. Thank you all.